Thank you to the Atlantic Council for organizing the Veterans Advanced Energy Summit. Our office could not function without the hard work, experience, and devotion of our own veterans on staff, and I am proud to work alongside them. They have found a great transition from their military careers to the clean energy economy, and I hope this week's event inspires you to follow a similar journey. At the Department of Energy, we have a diverse group working together as one across more than a dozen offices to research, develop, demonstrate, and deploy solutions to the world's greatest challenge, combating the threat of climate change. We call it the Clean Energy Job Corps, and we're looking for over 1,000 talented individuals with experience like yours, whether it's engineering, IT, cybersecurity, communications, finance, project management, human resources, and more. We cannot do what we do without people like you. Veterans have the potential to help drive this clean energy economy forward for many reasons. First of which, you are team players. At the Loan Programs Office, we're putting out billions of dollars in loans to deploy clean energy and advanced transportation projects. To do that, our staff of financial, engineering, legal, and environmental professionals work as one. But to reach the scale of clean energy deployment we need as a country, we need more team players like you to get the good work done. Our team at the Department of Energy also carries a sense of duty and is mission-driven, qualities I know that all of you possess. So the commitment you bring, the responsibility you take on, and the accountability you hold make you not only hard workers, but great leaders. You are essential in addressing our nation's most pressing climate challenges, especially because this energy crisis impacts our national security. By bringing a global perspective to the workplace, you understand the importance and urgency of the U.S. becoming energy independent. We value that perspective. Your discipline, organization, confidence, creativity, and desire to contribute to a mission larger than yourselves helps drive our work forward in deploying next-generation clean energy technology and aiding America in meeting its goals of a carbon-free power sector by 2035 and a decarbonized economy in 2050. Thank you for your service to this country and your devotion to a cleaner and more equitable future.
So at this time, I want to invite Julia Piper back to the stage. Just as a reminder, Julia is a senior fellow with the Global Energy Center at the Atlantic Council, the producer and host of the podcast Political Climate. She'll be engaging in a virtual conversation with David Livingston, so I have my tap shoes on just in case we have any audio issues.
Right. Hello, welcome back. Let's see if we can get David Livingston pulled up on the screen. I'll have to tap dance if not. Hi, David.
Hello, Julia, and a big hello to Dan as well.
Yes. Well, it's awesome to have you with us, David. I know you, like many in the government, are very busy. So by way of introduction, David Livingston is a senior advisor in the Office of the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry. He thus plays a major role in the president's climate policy, not just here at home, but really on the world stage. And so prior to joining government, David previously worked at the Eurasia Group. He's also a friend to many of us here in the room, having been the former Deputy Director for Climate and Advanced Energy at the Atlantic Council. And I have to credit you, David, with getting me involved with the Atlantic Council, so thank you so much for all you do personally and professionally. All right, so let's get into it. I know you can't talk too much about this, David, because it's still being finalized, this being the Inflation Reduction Act, but I do think we have to start there to ground this conversation. We know that it's passed the Senate, we're waiting on the House. I want to know from your perspective what this means for US climate action on that global stage. We are heading into another round of COP negotiations in Egypt later this year. So what would the passage of the IRA mean for the US in that context?
Well, first of all, let me thank you, Julia, for this great opportunity to reconnect in such an exciting time for the climate, clean energy, and US competitiveness agenda. I want to thank the Atlantic Council I want to thank Dan Mish and the full team that he works with that puts together this exciting event. It's incredibly rewarding to see what the Veterans Advanced Energy Summit has grown into and what this initiative is giving life to and catalyzing. I also want to just underscore that it is deeply rewarding to now work on these global challenges for someone who is a veteran himself, in Secretary Kerry, as the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate. I just want to note, just to connect and to ground this in the whole raison d'etre of the summit and why you're gathered in Chicago today. Secretary Kerry comes at these issues from a place of not just being excited about the technology, not just being urgently moved by the moral imperative to act for our future generations and for our own futures on this planet, but also he comes at this with, given his deep experience as a soldier, as a statesman, as a veteran, who understands that the attention we pay today and the investments we make today in a more safe and secure world can pay significant dividends in avoiding the kinds of destabilization, conflict, economic destruction and loss of life that could very well occur if we do not rise to the challenge of beating the climate crisis. So it is that framing that our office takes towards these issues. And it is for the reasons above that it is so exciting that we have moving through the Congress, and of course this is still for Congress to work its way through and eventually hopefully to go to the president's desk, a legislative effort which can give additional life and even additional energy to the movement of the United States towards a net zero economy, putting us well on our way to net zero by 2050, putting us well on our way to fulfilling the climate pledges that we made, the Paris commitments that we've made, and most importantly, though, bolstering United States energy security, bolstering United States manufacturing and economic prosperity so that we are set to create jobs and to prosper as our own economy and as the world moves to decarbonize in the years and the decades ahead.
That was a great opening remark. Thank you, David. I want to circle back on the COP27 part of this discussion. Can you talk a little bit about what that summit is expected to do? I think a lot of people will remember Glasgow as being a really big landmark COP. So what kinds of pledges do you hope the US comes up with leading into that event, and what will that event mean in the negotiations for climate change, addressing climate change more broadly?
Yeah, Glasgow was indeed a very significant COP, COP26 last year. We came out of that climate conference with something on the order of a bit more than 50% of global GDP aligned via long-term and shorter-term decadal commitments, aligned with a trajectory that could keep the world keep having the 1.5 degree Celsius temperature target within reach. And that's again reflected in both 2050 and 2030 targets. That's significant because that also means that to get more than 50% of global GDP aligned with that, it takes more than just the G7. It takes more than just the United States. It takes more than just the developed world. We also saw significant momentum last year from the likes of countries like the United Arab Emirates, put forward a net zero 2050 commitment and will be updating its NDC accordingly. We saw significant moves forward by the likes of South Africa, many other countries around the world. And also when you look at some of the other targets that are complementary to this, India, for example, has an extremely aggressive and ambitious renewables target, renewables deployment target, that if it meets it by 2030, will be very much on a trajectory that can be consistent with an ambitious climate trajectory that will help to keep 1.5 degrees C within reach. Now, all that being said, a bit more than 50% of GDP is not enough. We have to bring on more of the world's economy, including the world's largest economies, most capable economies, along a trajectory that will keep 1.5 degrees C within reach. That means many of the countries that have not yet committed to net zero 2050, that have not yet put forward 2030 nationally determined contributions or NDCs that can keep us there. And so Egypt this year, the Egypt COP in Sharm el Sheikh, COP27, is going to be incredibly important for continuing to raise ambition, but also implementing the pledges that have already been made and mobilizing complementary efforts across sectors and across other thematic areas that can help to reinforce resilience, protect our most vulnerable countries around the world that are truly on the front lines of climate change, and again, mobilize innovation, resilience, adaptation, and creative ways of mobilizing additional finance to facilitate this transition. It's what we all wrap together ourselves and call implementation plus. This year, 2022, on the road to COP27, is truly a year of implementation plus. It is not only enough to start actually implementing the commitments and the pledges that have been made. We have to continue raising ambition, move that something more than 50% of global GDP much closer to 100% of GDP over the years that lay ahead. And we must do more to create a sort of virtuous cycle of momentum across industrial sectors, across transport sectors, in agriculture, for example, with what we're doing with the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate, to offer innovative and novel adaptation technologies and solutions to those most in need of them, what we're doing with initiatives like our Prepare initiative and others. And then also, we're focusing on fast mitigation. One of the most significant outcomes of COP26, some would argue, was the signing by well over 100 countries around the world of the Global Methane Pledge, which collectively seeks to reduce global methane emissions by 30% by the year 2030, from a variety of sectors, a variety of strategies, a variety of places around the world. This has only grown in importance and in membership since COP26, and it also represents one of the most high leverage short-term opportunities we have to reduce the pace of global warming and climate disruption and put ourselves on solid footing to be able to align along a long-term trajectory that will help to keep climate change in check. Methane is so important because it is a powerful, extremely powerful, short-lived climate pollutant. And it also represents, by the way, one of the greatest opportunities we have to address climate change and enhance energy security. When you think about the fact that the world's vented, flared, fugitive emissions, in other words, our wasted methane today, that's going into the atmosphere and damaging the planet, our wasted methane represents the amount largely of natural gas, methane, that Europe was previously importing from Russia. That means that we have economic waste out there that we can capture, monetize, get to market, help our friends and allies around the world, and help address the climate crisis at the same time. These are just some of the integrated fabric of different initiatives and efforts that we're going to be focusing on the road to COP28. And in this year, that Egypt hosts an Africa COP, a COP that is truly hosted in Africa, by Africa, and reflecting in many ways the continent's priorities. It is critical that we do this in a way that is, of course, responsive to the needs of those that are truly on the front lines of climate change, and we're very much committed to doing that.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, David. You rhymed off a lot there just by memory. Very impressive. So let me ask one last Inflation Reduction Act related question. You listed a lot of initiatives there which were happening outside of that framework. So what does it mean, though, if the US succeeds in passing this bill, for it to show up with a piece of legislation like that? What will that mean for other relationships with other countries?
Well, it certainly means that the United States will be absolutely taking the lead in terms of the scale and pace of investment in decarbonization that is taking place globally. This can be put on the scale of anything that any other economy around the world has done, including Europe and including China, when it comes to investing in clean energy. We are going to be doing so in a way, moreover, that attracts capital, attracts investment, attracts talent to the United States. And so we will truly be not just deploying solutions, but we will also become a hub of innovation of the next technologies we need to get towards deep decarbonization. We are going to be a place where investors around the world look to generate returns in the clean energy transition and generate climate wealth in the clean energy transition. We are going to be a place that is going to be driving some of the largest quality job creation in the clean energy sector in the world, when you look at the focus that this bill has on not just the quantity of jobs in this sector, but also the quality of those jobs. And I can say that it will help us to build secure and resilient clean energy value chains that will help to diversify our energy economy, help to enhance our energy security, and again, will make the United States even stronger and more resilient to various sorts of economic or geopolitical shocks that may present themselves in the years or decades to come. I think that that kind of holistic approach is very important. When you look at the 10% clean energy manufacturing tax credit that's in the legislation, for example, when you look at the support for electric vehicle deployment and the support embedded within that for United States manufactured vehicle components, United States and our partner manufactured critical minerals and inputs, that's incredibly important. Remember, we account for much less than 10% of the global processing capacity in many critical minerals, in many different clean energy technology inputs. This bill will help us to better integrate those value chains, not only in the United States, but also in some of our most trusted partners. And in doing so, we will ensure that the global energy transition and that our American energy transition is truly on sustainable footing, that we can accelerate in a path that is secure and sustainable into that clean energy transition. So those are some of the things I am the most excited about. I think that building a prosperous political economy around the clean energy transition and actually generating wealth and economic growth through that and saving consumers money is the right way to go. And I am heartened actually by the approach that we are taking with this. And I think that it's going to give us incredible leverage internationally to make the case that the United States is leading, the United States is driving ahead. And I think the power not only of our example, but the power of our magnetism, the amount of investment, the amount of attention that this effort is going to attract will be extremely helpful in climate diplomacy efforts as the United States looks to chart a course to COP27 and beyond.
Right, so you talked a little bit about electric vehicles there, but about domestic manufacturing of other clean energy technologies. But there's also these other harder to abate sectors that I know you work closely on. So flashing back to COP26 again, that was in Glasgow, President Biden announced with collaboration with your office, the First Movers Coalition, which is a new platform for companies that to harness their purchasing power and supply chains to create early markets for innovative clean tech known for tackling the climate crisis. Again, these are some of the harder to abate sectors. Walk us through what those are and where you see the innovation unfolding in that realm.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, just to reference the bill again, one of the more exciting things in here is the enhancement of the 45Q tax credit, right? The tax credit for carbon capture and storage, if that were to come into effect. One analysis that I saw, and just speaking personally, but just based on what I've been personally reading, one analysis I saw from the Clean Air Task Force suggested that having a $180 45Q for direct air capture, having an $85 45Q for industrial CCS, the likes of cement, aluminum, steel manufacturing, petrochemicals, et cetera, that's going to help 13x growth. Again, increase by 13-fold the carbon capture capacity in the United States into the mid-2030s. That is enormous growth. If you're a global investor, again, if you're in the private sector and you're looking for some of the major growth opportunities in the American economy, that's going to make our industrial sector, our steel sector, our cement sector, our aluminum sector incredibly attractive in terms of what can be done to make these investments, capitalize on these tax credits, and put our workers in our manufacturing sector on footing to be some of the most competitive and the most carbon competitive in the world over the coming years. So that's very exciting. Now, what we're doing with the Office of the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, in cooperation with the World Economic Forum, is an initiative that I think is highly complementary to these sorts of investments. It's something that we call the First Movers Coalition. And what it's doing is it's trying to generate demand from some of the most important and large and global companies in the world, the likes of Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, Google, DHL, Maersk, National Grid, you name it. Some of the largest companies in the world. Together, we have about 55 plus companies representing $8.5 trillion worth of global market cap and accounting for around 10% of the Fortune 2000. So a significant chunk of the world's global market listed economy that are making demand commitments for the year 2030 onwards across a range of green products and technologies in hard-to-abate sectors. So to give a specific example, what it means is that a company says from the year 2030 onwards, if I'm an auto manufacturer, 10% of all of my steel procurement, 10% of all the aluminum I procure to make a vehicle, to make a truck or a car, is going to be near zero emission steel or near zero emissions aluminum. If I'm a builder, contractor, I make a pledge that, again, a certain percentage of all of my cement is going to be truly green, nearly decarbonized cement or concrete. And if I'm in the shipping sector, let's say I'm a company shipping goods around the world to customers, or I happen to be actually a ship owner. It means that a certain amount of all the ships that I purchase, operate, or the cargo that I own and then ship to customers on ships will be done using a zero emissions vessels or vessels using zero emissions propulsion or fuels. And we're doing this also in aviation, in trucking, where we have extremely ambitious targets and commitments that companies are making on zero emission trucking, 100% medium duty, and close to a majority of heavy duty trucks. So we're mobilizing significant, concrete, understandable, uniform demand commitments from some of the largest companies in the world, signaling that there will be demand for these sorts of products, including in hard-to-abate industrial sectors, from the year 2030 onwards. That creates the demand signal that hopefully helps to break the chicken and egg. Now, when you take the sorts of supply side incentives, the manufacturing, production, CCS incentives that we were just talking about, you create a virtuous cycle now of demand, investment, a ramp up of supply of near zero products that will only generate yet more demand. That is how you kickstart a true transformation in a positive way of our industrial sectors to make them some of the most competitive and some of the most decarbonized and lean and green and in the world. And it is how you start to scale up the sorts of promising technologies that will, again, help to make American workers, American businesses, and our economy incredibly strong as we head into the middle and the latter part of this decade. So again, with demand side initiatives like the First Movers Coalition, paired with these kinds of supports for investment and supply, there's an incredibly virtuous cycle there that I think we're seeing a lot of excitement from labor, from the private sector, and from the international community that, again, is knocking on our door to learn more about what we're doing in the United States, to see how they can partner with the United States. And that gives us incredible leverage in our diplomacy to go help the world to move faster as well.
All right, I'll start getting everyone to think about any questions you might have. You can take the mic here in a few minutes, or I'll look online in just a moment. Let me ask you quickly about the US relationship with China. You mentioned methane emissions. That is one area where the two countries are collaborating, but we're seeing some tension around those types of collaboration now in the wake of some disagreements over Taiwan. So let me just ask you, do you see that relationship being repaired anytime soon? How do you approach those types of negotiations so we can stay on track with our climate targets?
Well, obviously, China is the world's largest emitter and an incredibly important piece of the puzzle in addressing the climate challenge. When it comes to recent events and decisions, I'll just reiterate what Secretary Kerry said, and I think he said it very well, which is that if China thinks that it is punishing or sending a message to the United States, it is sorely mistaken. What it is doing with its actions is, unfortunately, only harming itself, only harming global climate efforts, and in particular, only harming the developing world and some of the most vulnerable countries in the world. The United States is going to continue to lead. The United States is going to continue to invest. The United States is going to continue to get out there every day, 24/7 with our climate diplomacy, working with countries around the world to try and address this global crisis. So I can only speak for US leadership, and I can say that it has never been stronger. and that we are not resting, and we are going to continue to be out there moving ahead.
I think that's evidenced by all the programs and initiatives you laid out today, for sure. One last question for me is I want to put to you the same one I asked Congressman Krishnamurthy earlier today about balancing three key initiatives. One being energy affordability for consumers, also energy security, not only here in the US, but with our allies abroad, and then also our climate goals. So obviously we're seeing the energy crisis in the wake of the war in Ukraine create additional tensions. I know that the president recently traveled to Saudi Arabia in a similar vein of trying to ensure affordability and reliable energy supplies. So how do you think about the marriage of those three core initiatives and how to balance them all at this critical time?
Well, you're absolutely right. Energy affordability, energy sustainability, energy security are intrinsically interlinked and intertwined. And I would argue that the clean energy transition and some of the opportunities that we have in the clean energy transition in the United States, but also around the world, is actually the place where all three of them do come together. If you think about this moment in time, there has never been a better moment to invest, to make the sorts of investments that will reduce exposure of economies and societies to volatile fossil fuel prices, that will kickstart energy innovation, job creation, and investment activity around the world, and that will do so in a way that, again, reduces emissions and that enhances energy diversification, enhances the mix that we see in energy systems, that gives countries a portfolio approach where they are, again, less vulnerable from a price perspective to volatile fossil fuel prices, and also from a security perspective, less reliant on any one single source or supplier. The events that have unfolded in Ukraine, Russia's further invasion of Ukraine, the energy crisis that has been transpiring not only in Europe but around the world, I think only underscores that importance of not relying on a single source, single technology, a single supplier. It has underscored the importance of diversity. And similarly, the volatility that we see in fossil fuel prices underscores that importance of seeking additional diversification that can help, that can be non-correlated to those prices, or indeed can offer a source of stability or continuity or a fixed recurring cost going forward. That's the sort of thing that is offered by investments in things like nuclear, in solar, in wind, in geothermal. And then at the same time, there still, of course, is going to be some role during the transition of legacy energy systems. And that's where it's so exciting, the opportunity that we have, especially in the United States, but also elsewhere around the world, to invest in carbon capture technologies so that you can have gas plus CCS or some fossil plus CCS in that mix to provide some variability, to provide some flexibility in those grids. And again, to find a symphony of decarbonized assets of various different kinds and technologies that can work together to help decarbonize the grid while providing that affordability and providing that sustainability. To give you an example from the president's trip to Saudi Arabia, one of the major deliverables from that trip was actually a landmark climate and clean energy partnership and framework for cooperation between the United States and Saudi Arabia that will see deepened cooperation on a range of energy technologies and a range of clean energy and decarbonization solutions, from enhancing our work on reducing methane emissions to deepening our partnership on carbon capture, utilization, and storage, to advancing clean hydrogen, including green hydrogen, and seeing what can be done to incubate and further catalyze the market for that clean hydrogen in the most compelling use cases in sectors ranging from heavy industry to long distance transportation and beyond, as well as working together to try and accelerate progress towards our mutual respective clean energy and power targets. Saudi Arabia has an ambitious target of reaching 50% renewables by 2030. And we in the United States, as Jigar Shah laid out, have an ambitious objective of a net zero power sector by 2035. There's much that we can do together. And the fact that we can address and have a serious dialogue about energy security dynamics, energy market dynamics in current energy markets, and work together to look ahead towards a prosperous partnership that is rooted in the transition to a cleaner energy system, and that we can do that at the same time, I think is not demonstrating that anything is at odds. I think that is exactly what a serious, sober, and mature country and set of partners should do and should be doing in the face of such a complex energy transition. We shouldn't pretend like this is not a complex energy transition. We should not pretend like there aren't many moving parts. We should not pretend like it's not important to manage that transition in a thoughtful and mature manner. And being able to both address energy security and affordability in current energy markets in the short term, and work together on accelerating in a thoughtful way that clean energy transition over the longer term. That's exactly what we should be doing. And so I think you can look for more examples like that over time, where we work with countries, again, on managing the transition, not pitting one narrative against each other, but indeed dealing with the realities we have and accelerating that transition in a way that overall and over time lowers costs and enhances security.
Well, just recently in June, Special Envoy John Kerry said at the Summit of the Americas that the green transition, the transition you're referencing here, will be bigger than the Industrial Revolution. And I thought that was an interesting framing, and I think speaks to a lot of the stuff you laid out here today, David. I do see one quick question. We have 1 minute, please.
Hi, David. Thank you for being here. Patrick Littlefield with Deloitte. Question for you. How is the State Department thinking about national security and global security as a part of its diplomatic mission in terms of climate? Does it need to take new forms? In the words of a great Massachusetts politician, all politics is local. What does that look like through our diplomatic channels, and how are we implementing it?
Thank you. That's a terrific question. And I will say some of the answers are embedded within your question. It indeed requires some new forms of diplomatic engagement. It indeed requires, to the point of this whole summit, bringing in a new generation and a new set of perspectives, not only in the clean energy sector that's deploying these technologies, but also in government that's working with our partners around the world and with countries around the world to accelerate their own energy transitions, to make them more resilient to the impacts of climate change, and to deal with that tricky interlinkage, that complex interlinkage between security issues, stability issues, and the climate crisis. So indeed, that means getting more veterans, in fact, who have been on the front lines of seeing this in the Middle East, in South America, in Sub-Saharan Africa, in Southeast Asia, who see how water security crises translate into national security crises and how those link back to the effects of climate change. Those are exactly the sorts of people that we need to be our diplomats, our assistant secretaries, our ambassadors of tomorrow. So much of this, I believe, starts with people. It starts with human capital. It starts with talent. And it starts with taking those that have the most relevant experiences and empowering them to be in positions of leadership. So that's something that we need to do within government. We're already working on it. We need to continue to do so. That's something that underscores why this summit is so important, vis-a-vis not only the private sector, but also the public sector. And then I will also emphasize, we're going to find, I hope, new examples of creative diplomacy that builds off of not only the challenges, but the opportunities presented by the climate crisis. I'll give you one example just to leave you with. Late last year, I flew to the UAE with Secretary Kerry to cement what had been a very quietly negotiated political level understanding between Israel, Jordan, the UAE, and with the support of the United States, that recognized that Israel and Jordan, despite traditional differences, the UAE as well, despite complicated regional politics, that all those three of those countries shared a vested interest in addressing the impacts of climate change, including the reduction of available fresh water in an already water-parched region, and taking advantage of rapidly falling clean energy costs, and doing both of those in a way that would actually help to strengthen ties between countries that traditionally had certainly had no shortage of differences. And so what we agreed to was to work towards pursuing and seeing if we could make commercially viable something that we call Project Prosperity. It will see solar projects built in the country of Jordan with electricity lines carrying the solar generated electricity across the border to Israel. It will see new water investment being made in Israel to carry new drinking water, fresh water across the border to Jordan. And with the UAE making investments to help facilitate this, with the United States making diplomatic and political investments to help accelerate and encourage and ensure the success of this project. It's been an incredibly challenging but rewarding micro example of the sort of diplomacy that can be unlocked when we view the climate crisis not just as a crisis to be worried about or grappled with, but also as a set of opportunities to question, to call into question, to reframe, to reconfigure some of the old obstacles, political obstacles and dynamics that have been pervasive in regions, including the Middle East and the Levant. So that, I hope, is an example of the exact sort of diplomacy that we need to be thinking more about. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy. None of this means that this is going to be automatic, and I'm not trying to paint you an overly rosy picture. But again, we as the United States, in a bipartisan manner, working together, can achieve so much, especially on the back of the sorts of investments that I know are going to be made in our exciting clean energy sector and technologies over the years ahead. So if we can stay mature, stay focused, and work to manage this transition in a thoughtful way, there's enormous value creation in our diplomacy, in the private sector, and for the very sorts of talent that's there in the room in Chicago right now.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. David, thank you so much for speaking with us today. Really appreciate it. Give our speaker a round of applause.
Thank you, Julia.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Julia. Before the next panel, which is our workforce development and training panel, I'd like to introduce a guest speaker here, James Rodriguez. He is the Assistant Secretary of the Veterans Employment and Training Services Program at the U.S. Department of Labor. And James, are you there? It's coming online. 1 second here. James, let us know when you can hear us. All right. James, good to go. Can you hear us?
I can. Hopefully you all can hear me.
Excellent. Yes. So the stage is yours here for the intro remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Dana. What I wanted to do is apologize, first of all, for not being able to attend in person. Like many of you all, my schedule is pretty complex these days with the current environment. But we do have our great Eric Asmussen representing DOL vets from Chicago, and he would do a great job in representing our agency. He's very, very familiar with everything we do, is well versed in all of our programs, and I'm glad he is still able to represent the agency. But what I wanted to do was talk about a couple of things that I think are relevant to the conversations you all are having there today. And I want to start that off with a quick overview of DOL vets, Veteran Employment Training Services, for some of the things that you all may not be aware of that our agency actually does, but in specific, a couple of programs that we know will be valuable to partnerships with the things you all are doing in advanced energy. So first of all, vets consist of over 2,800 federal and state staff, contractors, and grantees. And last year, our agency alone, with all of our support resources, touched approximately 331,000 veterans and military spouses across all of our agency programs. That's little known fact to a lot of folks who do not understand the scope of our work. In that process, we have four main lines of effort that we often refer to rather as our 4 Ps. And the first one being prepare, where we prepare all of our veterans, transition members, and military spouses for meaningful careers. We have approximately 400 contractors supporting this employment workshops, or the TAP workshops that you all are familiar with, at over 200 installations worldwide, where we're serving the approximate 200,000 service members that transition out of the military each year. Our second P is provide them with employment resources and expertise. And one of our flagship programs, many of you all are familiar with, is our Jobs for Veteran State Grants, where we fund approximately 1,500 veteran reps at American Job Centers nationally to include 1,000 disabled veteran outreach program specialists. To date, we have 162 grantees, also supporting our homeless veterans reintegration program, where our focus is employment and reemployment for veterans who may be experiencing homelessness or at risk of becoming homeless. And then third, protect their employment rights as National Guards or reservists who get called to active duty to do our nation's bidding at home or abroad. We protect their rights through our USERRA Employment, United States Employment and Reemployment Rights Act. We do that all across the entire country. And then finally, the fourth P is promote their employment opportunities. Well, we have 6 regional veteran employment coordinators, all led by Eric, who's there with you all today, to help connect employers with federal, state, and other resources to help them find and hire veterans. And finally, we have our Hire Vets Medallion Award program that is the only federal program to recognize employers who hire, retain, and support our veterans. And the application for that will actually occur in January of 2023. So I encourage anyone that works with employers who are hiring. Let me move over a little bit to talk about what is our priority. And one of those priorities is getting the military to civilian employment transition right. And that equates to working with partners like you all. We have some numerous initiatives that I think are relevant to this conversation, but I want to highlight a couple of them. And one of them is our Employment Navigator Partnership Pilot. This is our first program that provides one-on-one career assistance to interested transitioning service members and their spouses outside of the traditional TAP classroom. And we are currently at 20 military installations worldwide, to include Japan and Germany. Our employment navigators, they do a one-on-one assistance and counseling with our transition service members to identify employment opportunities through career exploration and connections to available resources all across the spectrum of the government and non-governmental partners. We also have our off-base transition training pilot that some of you may be familiar with. We're currently at 5 states, and our goal is to move to 20 states here over the next year or two. We're off to a good start in these 5 states. California, Pennsylvania, Texas, Massachusetts, and North Carolina are the states that we're currently working with. And to date, we've supported over 670 participants who've attended the training at each one of these states and military spouses. This is important because what it is, it's that next step of support for veterans who have been out of the military for a little while and maybe need some support in the re-emerging into the employment market. So this helps all veterans. There's no requirements besides being a veteran that an individual can, or an individual needs to participate in this program. We understand how valuable this is, and it's been extremely valuable for those who may have lost a job due to the pandemic. One other program I want to highlight briefly is our transition employment assistance for military spouses and our wounded warrior and caregiver workshops that are occurring as well, because we know how valuable our military spouses and our caregivers are to the successful transition of veterans. Lastly, I want to speak a little bit about our apprenticeships and how it is important for us to have strong partners such as Department of Defense and other agencies that support the DoD SkillBridge program. Registered apprenticeships are an earn while you learn training model where apprentices can gain paid, relevant workplace experience, classroom instruction, and a portable nationally recognized credential. The average salary for a registered apprenticeship graduate is $77,000, and 93% of apprentices who complete their program are retained by the employer. On average, apprentices graduates earn $300,000 more over their lifetime compared to similar peers who don't complete a program. A couple of our partners who you all are familiar with, DoD, as well as US MAP or United Services Military Apprenticeship Program, the largest single DOL registered apprenticeship with over 100,000 active apprentices. We're currently working with DOL Offices Apprenticeship as well as with DoD, as I mentioned before, to explore additional ways how we can have employers participate in both of these programs. So with that, what I want to do again is thank you all for allowing DOL vets to be part of this conversation and allowing us to look at new and innovative ways to find careers for our veterans who have transitioned out of the military or in the process of transitioning out. Please feel free to connect with us at any time. Eric is there representing the agency, as I mentioned, and we are more than happy to continue the conversation as the opportunity presents itself. So thank you all again for giving me a few minutes to speak, and I apologize again for not being there in person. Dan, back over to you.
James, thank you so much for being here. I do just want to say that I'm very much looking forward to the next panel that we have. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, while you may have a job that you're happy with, you're not looking to make any kind of change, we're all here to build a community and help each other. So the things that you learn from the panel we have and the entrepreneurs that follow, it is about paying it forward, taking what you hear and sharing that with the people and the veterans in your network. So at this time, I'd like to invite Laura Schmiegel, who is the Senior Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at Orion Talent, and the panel that follows.
I am very excited to be here, and I feel like I kind of won the panel jackpot at this conference because we're here to talk about jobs. And I think whether you're a veteran or an employer here, we all recognize that this industry and consequently our national security are not going to be secure and successful unless we have a workforce that is ready and capable to fill the jobs that we all have and that we know are coming down the pipe. So I am extremely excited to talk to this panel who is going to tell you all about the ways to get more veterans' butts into your seats. So I'm going to start with Lisa Lutz, who's the president and CEO of Solutions for Information and Design, which is a private company that contracts with DoD to manage pretty much all of their transition and career development programs. So Lisa, welcome.
Thank you.
Next, we have Grant Johnston, who's the Vice President of Development for Airstreams Renewables, which is a company that trains veterans in renewable energy jobs on installations. Welcome, Grant.
Thanks.
Next, excuse me, we have Eric Asmussen, referenced by the great James Rodriguez, who is the National Veterans Employment Manager at the Department of Labor, Veterans Employment and Training Services, DOL Vets. Hello, Eric. And finally, we have Richard Lawrence, who is the Program Manager for Solar Ready Vets, which is a part of the Interstate Renewable Energy Council. So welcome to our panel. I'm very excited to get started. Just to set the scene a little bit and a little bit of housekeeping, as with all of the other panels, we are live, we are on the record, we're live streaming. For those of you at home, please don't forget to tag us, post us everywhere you post, and please submit questions if you're interested in anything we say during this panel. At the end, there will be live Q&A at the microphone, as well as my ability to read questions off of my iPad. So we'll get started with a little discussion, we'll end with Q&A. So to set the scene a little bit, content-wise, there are about 3 million clean energy jobs in the US right now. And that doesn't even count the massive fire hose of money and opportunity that's going to come with the act that we've all been discussing, the Inflation Reduction Act coming down the pike. So what I want to do is talk about how that act actually affects jobs. Everyone here is in the business of preparing veterans for jobs in clean energy. So Richard, can I start with you? Because I think you have the closest connection to sort of the government machinations that are involved. Can you talk about how this act is going to translate into jobs and how it's going to come from the federal government down to the private sector and what we're going to talk about today?
Sure, thanks. So the first thing I think with this as a job development effort is just supporting the business development of this industry. And anything you do to support the development of the industry from that business side of things is going to grow jobs, right? That's how you grow jobs, is by selling more product, building more projects, getting things out there. So the Inflation Reduction Act does that, as we've all heard, through the extension of existing tax credits, the expansion of those tax credits and deductions, sort of, a lot of the ones that we're familiar with, the investment tax credit that's been there for solar and geothermal is there, will continue. It's going to be extended another 10 years. So one of the things we've heard already here, those longer term extensions, that's going to give that policy certainty, that risk development of both the manufacturing side of things and that implementation, the project pipeline there. So just starting off from there, that's just going to create a huge amount. So I'm working on the Solar Ready Vets project. So it's a Department of Energy funded by their Solar Technology Office. So most of my day-to-day is in the specifically for photovoltaics and the solar. IREC also, we produced the solar job census that just came out a few weeks ago. for 2021. So, I'm very familiar with the solar industry personally. I can speak to that. IREC does involve in the broader clean energy. Our mission is to transition to 100% clean energy future. So that involves transportation, involves all the other, certainly energy efficiency, all the other things. We do a lot with that too. But I'll start with solar as an example. Currently our job census shows there's 255,000 people working in the solar industry today. When we look at the Inflation Reduction Act, and where that's going to take us is by 2035, we will be somewhere between 4 times that and 6 times that. So somewhere between 1 million and 1.5 million workers in the solar industry. So going from 250,000 to, well, I guess low end people are saying 500,000 jobs, so doubling. And the high end, probably 6 times the current workforce in the next 10 years or so. So that's looking at solar. We look at other things like energy efficiency. Energy efficiency sector is 10 times the size of the solar industry. There's currently 2 million people in the energy efficiency sector. And all of that sector is being supported by these tax credits as well through the commercial energy efficiency deductions and other aspects like that. We're building new sectors with a lot of the clean transportation fuels and the battery manufacturing. So there's whole new areas of this sector that we have very little in place right now in this country. So across the board, there's tons of job creation just there. The key thing, though, that the Inflation Reduction Act does that's beyond anything that the industry has ever seen before is it puts apprenticeship requirements on every single one of those tax credits and deductions. So if you want to get, essentially what it does, so let's take the example. I mean, basically they're all the same. There's some slight variations, but it takes the existing tax credits. Let's say the investment tax credit is 30% of a system cost. If you're going to build a photovoltaic power plant, you can get 30% of that project cost paid through tax credits. What again, it extends those for 10 years, but what it does is says it reduces it to 6%. It's currently 30%, but what it does is it says, actually, tax credit's only 6%. Well, if you want to get that 30%, you have to pay prevailing wages, and you have to have a certain percentage of your labor being done by apprenticeships, registered apprenticeships, which we just heard Mr. Rodriguez talk about. Registered apprenticeships, great workforce development tool. If everyone is now going to have to be doing that within the industry. It starts with 10% of labor starting this year. 12.5% of your labor on your project next year will have to be in a registered apprenticeship, and it will go to 15% the year after that and ongoing. So the secretary will have to issue some regulations on how guidelines on how that's going to be tracked. And there are severe penalties for not meeting this requirement. So if you want to get that tax credit, if you sort of inadvertently don't meet it, you're going to be penalized $50 an hour for each labor hour that was not done by apprentices that should have been. If you intentionally do that wrong, you'll be charged $500 an hour as a penalty for avoiding the apprenticeship requirements. So this is a massive investment into the workforce development of this industry. Apprenticeships, great workforce development tool. Now every single company investing in these projects is going to need to implement registered apprenticeship programs to take advantage of all of this.
Wow. So massive opportunity to grow, produce jobs with a giant asterisk. So Eric, I would imagine that the Department of Labor is going to be key to helping employers out here and listening make sure they comply with that, and also helping more veterans get into apprenticeships. So can you take those one at a time? How does DOL help employers put together programs, and where can they find that? And then how do you help veterans get into them?
Sure. Well, that's we'll still have to wait to see what everything falls out of that, but it does look like there's a lot of restrictions for apprenticeships. But what we do, my job is I promote piece that Mr. Rodriguez was talking about, is I talk to employers, the regions. I have 6 RVECs, or 6 regional veteran employment coordinators, that their job is to work with employers to help them find, hire, retain veterans. So, and connect them to all of the resources that are out there. A lot of employers have no idea what the resources are, so I'm kind of preaching to the choir a little bit with the veteran employers here. And again, thank you, all you veteran employers here, and the veterans. Veteran unemployment's at 2.7%. It's pre-pandemic numbers, very low. That's all due to organizations like this that are actively looking to hire veterans. How do we do that in DOL? One part of our marketing piece is to talk to employers and introduce them to the portfolio of options that DOL has or DoD has with SkillBridge. At the end of the day, we are trying to connect employers to all the resources, and one of them is apprenticeships. It's a very good piece, return on investment for an employer, especially for if you're an apprentice, senior, or a veteran, you're looking for a career. You don't want to go to college. You don't want to maybe use your GI Bill for that. You can use your GI Bill for an apprenticeship piece. Also, the veteran gets paid a GI Bill housing allowance while you're going through the program. You learn while you earn, and then you start your career, and you have no college debt at the end of your apprenticeship. So part of that, what we do is we introduce the employer to the Office of Apprenticeship. John Ladd and his team, they are the Office of Apprenticeship. They will put a company through and register them. We introduce them. That's part of our spiel, is talking to employers and introduce them to the apprenticeship, introduce them to SkillBridge, introduce them to ways to hire veterans, share best practices from all the employers that we work with. Literally, we're from the government. We're here to help, and it's true. It is us. A lot of employers are surprised when you start talking to them on the federal side and start sharing business best practices, because a lot of businesses aren't used to that, especially from the government. But again, apprenticeships are a great tool, a great way to attract talent, a great way to build a pipeline of talent, and a great way for a fit for your veteran piece too. And I hope I answered that question.
Yes, and thank you for using the word pipeline, because I think it's important for employers to start thinking about an entire pipeline. I know something that we see at Orion Talent is that veterans don't start thinking about what they're doing early enough,
Sure.
Especially young veterans, and employers often don't think about how to pull talent in all the way from the service to the jobs that they want, including the future jobs those veterans can have. So let's start thinking about that, and that of course starts while they're in the service. So Lisa, can you talk a little bit about how DoD and Solid are working with DOL to prepare the veterans for their career using SkillBridge, but also your other programs, which I think are really innovative that you created, like Mill Gears, but then also how you were kind of trying to start that pipeline to DOL and how you're working with them.
Sure, absolutely. So in the 20 years or so that I've been working in supporting Department of Defense and the military services, I've seen a lot of programs come and go, but I think some of the most successful programs are those that support the entire military life cycle. So they have some level of support for recruiting, for training, for retention, for professionalization of the force, but then of course for transition, because as we all know, everybody ultimately will transition out of the military, and the vast majority of them will end up in the civilian sector. So there have been some very creative ways of promoting the ability of somebody to develop themselves while they're in the military, but also to ensure that once they leave the military, they can make that seamless transition to the civilian workforce. And just a couple that I'll highlight on. I'll start actually with one that's actually professional development. And some of you may be familiar with the non-academic credentialing program that the military services sponsor. Basically, you're also probably familiar with tuition assistance, which is academically focused. But the non-academic programs are intended to help service members attain, on a voluntary basis, during the course of their service, licenses, certifications, or to understand the requirements of an apprenticeship so that they can work towards those requirements while they're in the military. All of the services have what's called the COOL program. It's the Credentialing Opportunities Online program. And the support that we do for the COOL program is basically to map every military occupation, looking specifically at the related training, to civilian licenses and certifications. And then each of the services disseminates that information on the web with the COOL website, where they show, if you look up your military occupation, you can see the related civilian jobs and the related civilian credentials. It tells you a little bit more about what you might need to do while you're in the service in order to work towards attaining that credential. And then it hooks you up with resources to actually pursue the credential. So the Department of Defense will actually pay for services to pursue voluntary credentials while they're in the service. More recently, a platform that we've developed has really taken COOL to the next level. I like to call it the COOL on steroids. Because when you think about where you get your knowledge, your competency from, it's not just the specific training that you've had, but it's the variety of formal and informal opportunities that you've had to learn as you're working. And so what Millgears does, instead of just mapping credentials and jobs to the military occupation itself, it takes into account the unique qualifications of that service member. So every service member and a veteran has the opportunity to upload the formal documentation of their military training and experience, which could be the VMET document that many of you are probably familiar with, the Joint Service Transcript, or a more service-centric document. It parses all of that information, and then it tells you what jobs, but it's looking at your experience, it's looking at your training, it's looking at any civilian qualifications that you might have attained. So it's really looking more holistically at the individual's comprehensive portfolio and mapping them to credentials. Those are two of the programs that I think have really contributed to professional development. But the ability to connect to civilian occupations and civilian credentials is really founded on the initial training and the periodic training that service members get throughout their service. As you all know, the services invest tens of thousands of dollars in high quality, state-of-the-art training, and that forms the basis of preparation for when they leave the service. So the other program that Laura mentioned and that you've heard a little bit referenced of is a SkillBridge program. And I know I have a co-panelist here who participates in the SkillBridge program, and I expect there are others in the audience. So I don't want to go into it in a lot of depth. I did put some information out on the tables there, but just to let you know, it's basically an opportunity for service members to participate in industry-based training during their last 6 months of service. So if they're within 180 days of separating, they can participate in an approved SkillBridge program offered by an employer or another industry representative, so that they can begin learning what it would take in order to get a job. On the employer side, the employer is going to have the opportunity to tap into a very skilled workforce early before they even separate. And then the catcher, too, is that the Department of Defense is paying their salary and their benefits during that time. So that's a huge incentive for employers and other organizations to participate in the SkillBridge program. SkillBridge has started up officially around 2014, but it's been taken a little while to get instituted across the services. In 2017, there were 4,000 people who had participated in SkillBridge. Now there's over 14,000. In terms of partners, industry partners, there are over 2,300 industry partners, and Department of Defense is getting upwards of 400 applications per month for additional partnerships. So it's a very robust program. As Laura said, it's where where DOD hands it over to the Department of Labor, where they can then make that additional employment connection post-service.
It's really an amazing program. If any employers out here aren't familiar, I strongly encourage you to look into it. We have a SkillBridge authority at Orion for manufacturing and clean energy jobs, and I don't know an employer who doesn't want to know more as soon as we tell them you can have access to this talent before it hits the market, right? We can get them more ready for your jobs on day one, closer to productivity, closer to billable time. It's just, to me, it's like revolutionary. So let's talk about one of those revolutionary programs, Grant, with Airstreams Renewables. You have a really large program, a really robust program for clean energy. Can you talk a little bit about what it does, how it works with SkillBridge, and how employers here can take advantage of that?
Sure. So we train people to climb 300 foot in the air and go to work. So you're climbing a wind turbine, cell tower, or you're working on the ground with solar. So you go through our program, the veterans earn 10 different certifications, which are nationally recognized, and they walk onto a job in wind. You have to have 6 of them just to walk onto the job. So they're ready to go to work right away, and they can do that. How do you find these guys? That's the hard part. How do you find them? Well, before COVID, it was all job fairs. We do 80 recruit military job fairs. You'd find people that were transitioning through life. When you get out, you transition, you're not sure what you want to do, but you're 5 years in, you really haven't got a career yet, and then you jump into something. As a veteran, you jump into something. We've seen everything as far as veterans go. We've had veterans, we have homeless veterans come to our main campus all the time. They usually show up with everything in their car. 1 to 2 homeless veterans every class. Well, the good news is 95% of the time, they're walking out there with a job, they're changing their lives. So it's a great program. SkillBridge is part of it. We try not to get them to the homeless part, right? That's what SkillBridge is for. So basically, you try not to get them. And how do you find the veterans? So we actually just started a partnership, signed yesterday with Invenergy. They're going to help us find veterans. They're going to help us find, they're going to go to job fairs with us. They're going to be in some ads with us on Facebook. If any, they say social media, right? If you guys have a chance, go to the Airstreams Renewables page, like us on Facebook. Anybody on Facebook in here? A few, sort of, yeah. Like us on Facebook, you'll start getting ads. You'll see me in the front of our brand new National Training Center going, "Welcome to Airstreams." That's exactly what it says. And we consider ourselves a family. We've trained over 9,000 people so far to date. About 8,500 are those are veterans. We're on 9 different bases, 3 Marine, soon to be 4, and 5 Army, soon to open up at Fort Bragg. But it's really all about getting that person a job. It's really all about, we bring it down to the lowest common denominator, which is 1 vet. So just a real quick success story, Rebecca Espinosa, she found us on Facebook. She happened to live in San Antonio. I was going to that area. I went and met with her. Corrections officer. She said, "I know I'm going to die in being a corrections officer." She came to our facility at Fort Hood. She just happened to have somebody live there. She came to our facility as a veteran. That's usually one of the ones that's for active duty. She now works for NextEra, one of their solar fields, making $25, $26 an hour. She doubled what she pays. She's doubled her pay. So that is our mission, and that's what Invenergy is going to help us find more of. People that need help, people that want to transition into this industry, people that want to, it's not an easy industry it's an easy industry to get into if you want to do it, but a lot of people don't even know about it. So it's an industry that you just need to get information out, and through Facebook ads, through job fairs, through we're going to do an information commercial with Invenergy as well. But we really feel like this partnership is going to take us to the next level so we can find more veterans to help us with our mission, which is get everybody a job.
So you mentioned something important that I want to spend a little bit of time on, which is 10 certifications. And the certifications piece is what I find interesting, because I think for a long time when people talk about veteran employment, they're picturing a JMO program. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's a Junior Military Officer program. They're thinking about hiring officers. They're thinking about hiring senior NCOs. They have a college degree, which is obviously a proxy we all use as employers for competency and the ability to do a job. But more and more, we're seeing a need for non-degree candidates. And this industry is no exception. And 80% of the military, 2/3 to 80% of the military is enlisted. So can you talk a little bit about how Airstreams does outreach for enlisted candidates? And then Lisa, I want to talk to you about credentials and the importance of certifications and credentials for enlisted. Go ahead.
Sure. So we have 7 military, we call them RARs, but they're basically ex-recruiters, reps that work for us, that find people that are coming, that are already vets. But on every base we have a recruiter, and they constantly go to SkillBridge functions, because SkillBridge has a lot of functions. So we always tell them, just do something, like do United Piping, do truck driving, do something. And we're a big, SkillBridge is kind of a family. We don't care where the service members go. We don't care where they get their job. We're just happy if they're happy and they sustain something else in their life. So that's really, it sounds simple, but some bases are better than others at giving you access to the soldiers. Some do it like once a week, some do it like once a month, and it just depends on how they do it. There's still some issues where some commanders won't sign off on people's packets because they have to have them go to NTC or they have to have them go someplace else. So I know that a lot of the bases are working on that. It just depends on the command, but they're working on trying to make it better. But it's really, this industry is open to every MOS. I mean, of course, your Apache helicopter guy, mechanics, I mean, they get jobs, they get 10, 12 job offers in their sleep. I just talked to a cook the other day, he lives in San Antonio, he's got a great background with mechanical stuff. So what we teach them, like you said, the certifications make sense for them to get themselves to transition to this career.
Actually, I'm actually going to go to Richard first. Can you talk about how Solar Ready Vets works with veterans and how programs like that can help enlisted veterans find jobs in solar?
Yeah, so the Solar Ready Vets, we've got a variety of ways that we connect with veterans, and also a lot of our outreaches to employers to help bridge those gaps. A lot of the project, so it's gone through a couple of rounds now. The current iteration, we've really focused on making a lot of capacity building and sort of greasing the skids in many ways. So what we've been doing is working to make sure that the training programs that they might be going to, that those training programs are eligible for the GI Bill, for the solar training program. We've got over 100 solar training programs on our directory, and we've now got 50 of those registered with the VA, so you can use your GI Bill there. So we talked about apprenticeships. We've been working with employers for the last couple of years to talk about this apprenticeships before this has been, just because, as was said, apprenticeships are really one of the best ways to get veterans into any job out there, because they can use their GI Bill for housing allowance. It's a paid job from day one, so they're making a wage while they're learning. So we've been working on that apprenticeship piece and trying to deal with some issues there, get more employers familiar with how to start apprenticeship programs and all of that. We're actually starting up another Department of Labor award to help more in that regard and broader outside of just solar with that, so that'll be good. So lots of employer engagement, really to prime the pump, teach them best practices of how do you create job descriptions, how do you find the veterans. To address the actual talent pipelines, we connect with groups like Airstreams. So we have partnerships with Airstreams where we are connecting them directly with some companies, telling them about the programs, tracking placements there. Both Airstreams, another program, Home Builders Institute, has a similar 6-week training program, construction technology, similar, a little different focus on just general construction, but we're connecting employers there. We work with the certification body. You talked about certifications. We work closely with NABCEP through the project to make sure all their certifications are eligible for GI Bill. So they're all in the COOL program. They can get they can get those certifications paid for while they're on active duty, or they can use their GI Bill afterwards. So all that legwork, that's what we've been doing with this project in large part currently. So.
Yeah, actually, can you, or maybe Eric, can you explain the connection between the apprenticeships and the GI Bill? Because not every apprenticeship necessarily is qualified to allow. Can you explain why that's important and how that works? Because I think for employers here that want to start, sometimes they don't know right away, and it's a rude awakening.
It's the GI Bill is going to be under the VA, and then it has to be approved by the VA. It has to be approved, vetted program by the state authority approving authority to be GI Bill eligible, and that's part of we work with the VA at either at the state level or the federal level, and the employers to link them together to try to get that paperwork submitted and completed quicker. And what you're saying, and you're exactly right. There's some organizations that didn't know that, you got to go through another wicket to get it approved, because then now the veteran can leverage that. And then also at the same point, the VA is supposed to vet the organization to make sure it's not predatory and taking funds from a veteran GI Bill fund. So that's that piece too.
So in other words, just for clarification, because when I was at Booz Allen, we ran into this head on. So you can create an apprenticeship program, gets approved by DOL, but if you want veterans to go into that program and you want to be able for them to realize all the benefits and attract more veterans to that program, you want to make sure also that program has approval for VA to use GI Bill funding.
Correct. Right. It's a two parts.
I'll add the third step is actually letting the veteran know about it.
That's good.
Sure.
Because we have, I was just talking to some data looking at veterans who are participating in registered apprenticeship programs. Very few of them are actually using their GI Bill to get their housing allowance that they're eligible for. It's everybody thinks GI Bill and they think college.
Right.
Everybody needs to think college or apprenticeships. It's a different pot of money. You got your education fund, or you have your housing allowance if you're in an apprenticeship, and very few people are using that, and it's a really great tool.
So all this is important, Lisa, because we want to protect veterans and transitioning service members from, we know that the college, kind of what you get in a degree. Right. With some exceptions, most colleges have, a certain standard of quality. So can you talk about the importance of credentials and a little bit of what we talked about before, where SkillBridge is heading and how this is all fitting together to make sure that enlisted veterans coming out are also well qualified for jobs like the kinds in the room?
Absolutely. And I think you really hit the nail on the head earlier when you talked about a very important distinguishing factor between the enlisted and the officers. And basically the officers, as you know, as you said, come to the service with a degree. Most enlisted folks do not have a degree when they enter the service. Some of them may attain one while they're in the service, but the majority still leave the service without an academic degree. So it's much more difficult for them to show civilian employers when they leave the military that their skills are on par with their civilian counterparts. So being able to have a certification or a license helps employers understand the equivalency of the military training and experience, and it legitimizes the training and the experience that they've had while they're in the military. And I think that's a very key point. But to your point as well, Laura, the Department of Defense has established standards that it uses in terms of what kinds of certifications that it will pay for. And they have loosely based them on industry standards, but they're not going to approve just anybody who hangs up their shingle and says, I'm going to give you a certification in rocket science, you know. They really want to make sure that that certification has value and it will ultimately contribute to their ability to get a good job in the civilian workforce. SkillBridge also has similar vetting criteria. The Congress actually laid out the initial vetting criteria in the legislation that authorized the SkillBridge program, and then DoD has its own vetting process, and the SkillBridge provider has to actually sign a memorandum of agreement with the military and agree to adhere to certain, first of all, they have to be assessed and make sure they meet the eligibility requirements, and then they have to agree to adhere to certain criteria while they're implementing the program. So I think that's extremely important. I'll just mention a brief aside, if you don't mind. You know, talking about the fact that a lot of service, it's not if you build it, they will come. You do have to make people aware of these different resources that are out there and different opportunities to show your qualifications. And so mentioning the fact that, you know, a lot of folks don't even know about registered apprenticeship programs. A lot of service members also have the ability to participate in the United Services Military Apprenticeship Program, which Mr. Rodriguez referenced earlier. And as he said, that is a DOL registered apprenticeship program. But they'll get enrolled in the program, and they may or may not actually get that registered apprenticeship within their term of service. So one of the things that we've been looking at, and experimenting with to some degree with some of the industry, including the Utility Workers Union of America, is how could we potentially give them credit for prior learning and give them advanced standing based on their training and experience, but also based on partial completion of the US MAP program. So that's somewhat of an innovative way of making sure that they get credit for all the learning they've had so they don't have to repeat it when they leave the service.
So to be a SkillBridge program, an employer has an MOU with DoD who's going to vet their program and make sure it's good. To have an apprenticeship, they're going to work with DOL and make sure that they're a fully registered apprenticeship that has all the requirements that are going to train people up for that. And if they want to be VA approved so that veterans can use their GI Bill benefit, they have to work directly with the VA. So take a picture of the panel and their names if you're interested in utilizing these programs, which can really save you money and get you a true pipeline of candidates. It's worth it to go through these systems. They're not that complicated, really. Richard.
I would throw one other thing. A lot of registered apprenticeships, it's tied into the whole Department of Labor system. Yeah. So it can access other Department of Labor funding that goes through like the state workforce systems. So a lot of times you can get access to tax credits, additional tax credits for and wage reimbursements and other things like that that are available through the state level if they're in a registered apprenticeship program. So there's some other financial benefits as well.
And it's a wonderful tee up to the, I think last question we'll have before one last sort of call to action and then Q&A if you have any, which is for Eric. So all of these systems are in place to protect transitioning service members, correct? So I think that's part of the problem. The other half of it is veterans learning about these opportunities, right? So how do they, especially a lot of younger veterans, junior enlisted, they're not necessarily being reached by companies that are looking to hire veterans. So how is DOL, once you have a registered program, at least you can answer this too, it kind of also helps veterans find you, right? And Grant, you can talk about this as well. So like, can you explain that connection? Like, why is this important to go through all this bureaucracy to get vets?
Yeah, that's a good question. One part is how we're reaching our transitioning service members and military spouses is through the TAP class, or the Transition Assistance Program, and the EMPP, or the Employment Navigator Pilot Program that Mr. Rodriguez mentioned. We noticed that part of our priorities for vets is to get the transition right the first time for our transitioning service members. I mean, if you transitioned 3 years ago, TAP is completely different today than it was 3 years ago. When I transitioned a while ago, it was not the best program, and you'll hear that from a lot of people, but it is much better today than it ever was. And part of the program is the Employment Navigator program is getting experts one-on-one counseling with veterans that are transitioning service members and military spouses that want to take on this added help. But they'll teach them about apprenticeships. They'll do in-depth career counseling and then plug them into industry partners that vets has to get hired or get injected into an apprenticeship program nationally. So that's part of the way that we get and assist the transitioning service members to take advantage of the opportunities out there. And a lot of times when you're going through TAP, you're just trying to get through your paperwork and you're not really focused maybe on why we have TAP. And so the EMPP has served quite well with getting transitioning service members more in-depth help and also assistance with mil-spouse employment, which is also a priority for us in vets. But go ahead.
So they get the advice to go to these programs if the program's approved. So you get your program approved, you actually have the government agencies referring people to you if your program's approved.
Yes.
Okay. So Lisa, same thing,
Yeah,
correct?
absolutely.
Gears and,
Yep,
yeah.
SkillBridge as well. So
Grant, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, for the skill bridge piece, the main thing is you just got to make them aware of it. So they just don't. And like I said, some bases do better than others. But the one thing I want to enhance is that what we've seen in the wind industry and clean energy is that basically the veterans get advancement much faster than anybody else. So you know what you're hiring in a vet. I mean, I've got a 23 and a 20-year-old kid, and they weren't veterans, and I wouldn't hire them to lead anybody. So it's like, sorry, I hope they're not on this. But yeah, so basically, but I've seen it personally. In 12 years we've been doing this, it's like now I'm linked in with site managers. I'm linked in with guys that have progressed faster, and I just see that they progress way faster. And when you look at like, we've had three hired recently by Invenergy, and they're starting to progress pretty fast. So but you just see them progress way faster than a civilian does. I'm a civilian, so I'll make fun of us all I want. But it's just really cool to see that,
Yeah.
and they deserve it. But it's because of their knowledge and what they've learned and the leadership they've been taught that gets them to the next level.
That's right.
And if I could just add regarding the SkillBridge program, once the program has been approved, it is listed on the SkillBridge website. So service members can go to the SkillBridge website, see which programs have been approved. They can actually look at them on a map too to see where they're located. So there's a lot of really good information on the SkillBridge website that the service member can access.
Yeah, and they can actually go permissive TDY. So if you're at Fort Drum and I don't have a facility there, they can come down to Fort Benning and barrack at Fort Benning for 7 weeks, and they can do that with any of the programs. And they actually get a $1,000 stipend nowadays to help them with the travel.
Because they use their GI Bill for your program, correct?
For ours, but the stipend actually comes from we call it the Microsoft Act because they kind of did it, but I don't think that's what it's actually called. But they get a $1,000 stipend that has nothing to do with the stipend from the housing allowance.
Thank you, that's helpful. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Are there any questions about these programs?
I want to throw out one thing real quick though. There is a lot of flexibility in both SkillBridge and in apprenticeships. So there's lots of options to explore in both of those areas. So an employer can run everything themselves in-house, but there's also lots of options to participate in other existing programs like the Airstream program on the SkillBridge, or we're closely partnered with Hiring Our Heroes, which targets more of the officer level with mid and senior level positions, people with degrees, leadership experience. We're looking at different populations there, but there's a lot of flexibility even in creating apprenticeship programs. Who does the training? They have to be an employee, they have to be trained on the job by the employer, but all the rest of it, who does the related instruction, who's managing, who's reporting to DOE, there's a lot of flexibility. I want to throw that out there. So
Even around talent. All right, go ahead. Question.
Hey, good afternoon. Chris Rawlings, Vibrant Energy. Love what you guys are doing. I concur with you. The transition resources that are available during transition for veterans right now have drastically increased over the years. My transition was a crash and burn in 2008. So I'm happy to see everything's moving in the right direction. But we us and a couple of other companies as small businesses have gone to get approved to use the DoD Skill Bridge program, and even gone through having transitioning veterans apply to be in the program. And it seems there's it seems like the first enlisted group, you know, maybe the 1-term, 2-term folks are easily replaced a little bit easier. So their commands are allowing them to use the DoD Skill Bridge program, whereas the senior enlisted and officers are harder to replace. And as we know, it's a lot hard, you know, it's very hard to recruit people to even join the military these days. So commands are just denying the package. Do you guys have any numbers on how many packages are being denied, how many applicants you're getting in those various groups, whether they're you know, lower enlisted, E5, E6 and below, or senior NCOs and officers?
So I can take a stab at answering that. I'm not going to answer it very well. No, I don't know the detailed breakout as you're asking for it, but I did ask our staff this morning to say, you know, what percentage of SkillBridge participants are enlisted versus officer. And there's not even a lot of good information on that at the Department of Defense level right now. The services maintain that information. But there was a survey done of SkillBridge providers, and there was only about 180 that participated, so you have to take that with a grain of salt. But in 2020, when the survey was implemented, about just over 50% were enlisted personnel. Let's see if I got this right. I didn't think I wrote that down on my cheat sheet, but 15% were actually veterans, which we didn't really talk about, and another, I might have to come back to you with the specifics, but another, say, 10% were spouses. So again, another piece that we didn't talk about. So I'm guessing that maybe 25% officers, 50% enlisted. But as far as knowing what their pay grades were, I don't know that.
Well, you know, just as far as influencing the commanders at the command level to approve these applications, because they're just being told, we can't replace you. You just put in your retirement package. And again, it could be anecdotal evidence, not a representation.
Yeah.
I have to.
That's commander dependent.
I have to say that that hasn't been my experience. And when we created, so when Orion Talent's SkillBridge program is for junior enlisted, and we went to the service branches and talked to the senior personnel and said, what does this look like? We want to make sure we have command approval. We were told it was going to be harder to get the junior enlisted approval than it is for the NCO and the officers, because there's headcount issues. The commanders have to keep headcount. In the Navy, they may be deploying within those last 6 months, so they're more reluctant actually to let the junior enlisted go. And Hiring Our Heroes actually has a college degree requirement to even participate, and it's the biggest program out there. So it hasn't, again, like, I don't have stats, but it hasn't been my experience that it's very hard. In fact, my sense is that the SkillBridge program was created to help junior enlisted, and it's drifted toward more senior NCOs and officers over the years. But
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, and I'd encourage you to reach out to Hiring Our Heroes. Even if you have your own SkillBridge program, you could still participate in theirs. They have about 1,000 that come through, and they do 3 cohorts a year. And there's about 1,000. You know, you sign up, you're a member there, you'll get all 1,000 resumes sent to you every 4 months.
Get ready. Other questions?
Hi, I'm Troy Bean, COO of Greencastle Consulting, largest all-veteran company in the world, by the way. We'll talk
Wow,
about that
congratulations.
later. We have a DoD SkillBridge program, and one of the challenges that we've found so far is we're located in the Philadelphia region, and we want to have our SkillBridge fellows come to our locality. And we're recruiting nationally for SkillBridge, and we're getting a lot of attraction for it. But with the permissive TDY, their BAH, and their housing requirements, so they haven't cleared station yet. So say they're coming from Pendleton, like they still have a house and all their goods there, but they want to come to our program. So I don't know if you could think or you've seen any tricks or ways for them to help leverage that BAH or another way for housing. We're trying to look creatively in Pennsylvania, talking with the National Guard and the Veterans Affairs there to try to come up with solutions there. But that's one of the major, I think, issues for SkillBridge interested candidates and programs to kind of have them match up is if it's not in the area where they're going to go, or they already have family support, or it's within travel distance of their base, they're unable to get there because of that housing requirement.
Grant, you take care of housing for your participants, right? With
Yeah,
GI Bill?
yeah, so at our facility, they come to us, but I mean, we have we gutted a whole factory and put 58 basically cots in. I call them dorm rooms, and with a full kitchen, and that's how we do it. But for his, I mean, I would look at I know they have that $1,000 stipend, and I think that there's some stuff in the works. I've heard it is to where you can pay for housing while they're there working for you, because of course you can't pay them because it's not legal for them to get paid as well. But I think there is some stuff coming down the road where you're able to do that. LinkedIn with me later. If I hear anything, I can try and get you going.
Or Lisa or Eric, could they get their SkillBridge program VA approved perhaps? And
VA doesn't approve the SkillBridge program, but it could be approved under a different VA authority possibly, and then it could be used for that. That's a possibility.
then they could use their GI
Just a
Bill.
quick follow-up. Brad Pellegrin over here, he runs our program, and we're currently looking to try to develop an apprenticeship program so that we can also try to combine the whole thing together. But I think that's kind of the synergy. What you're talking about is if you have each of these things going, I think you can get a really powerful pipeline going. But thank you.
Absolutely. All right, I think we have time for one more. That's you.
Hey, Chris Nelson with Helios Energy. Our company designs, develops, and implements energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. Clarification question for you. You mentioned certifications or credentials like NABCEP. Just for clarity, is NABCEP covered while you're on active duty through tuition reimbursement? Is that
The cost of the exam is covered, the certification costs, not the training costs, would be covered by the COOL program if they're on active duty. They're all approved for that.
And actually, just to piggyback on that, so the services are authorized to pay for credential preparation programs, which would be the training program that would help you prepare for the exam. Only two of the services currently do that, the Army and the Air Force. Well, actually, the Coast Guard just started doing it as well. The other services are still trying to figure out, how do we ensure the quality of those programs before they invest the money in actually paying for the preparation program. But if you go out to the COOL websites, you can start with DoD cool.osd.mil. They show you all of the certifications that have been approved and the types of costs that are paid for.
so across all the services, it's not reimbursement for NABCEP
So,
in particular?
so my guess, if it's been approved for one, it will most likely been approved for all in terms of the certification exam fees and administrative fees. But as I said, it's not necessarily the training that would be paid for
It's a
across the
reimbursement
service.
of those certification costs to the veteran.
To the veteran?
Yeah.
Through tuition assistance?
It's through a
the
credentialing
COOL,
assistance.
yeah.
It's
Okay.
a separate pot of money.
What about after they separate? Can they use the GI Bill for the actual costs or just for the housing? Because I think
They can use it for the actual cost of the certification, but only if it's been approved by the VA. So
do we know if NABCEP has? 'Cause
I
it
don't
is-
know off the top of my
Okay.
head, but if you went to the VA, it
Yeah,
has it.
all NABCEP's credentials are approved for GI Bill, which would be veterans after service. So the cost of the exam, the application fees, the recertification fees, those costs are reimbursable through, and that is a separate pot than their education fund. It's again, the credentialing sort of fund.
And on the Services COOL websites, when you look up the certification, you can also see if it's been approved by the GI Bill too. So
once they're a veteran, though, they can use their GI Bill for the education piece as well. That's if the course is approved. That's what we've been trying to do is make sure all the courses are registered, all the training programs are registered.
So there's also an on-the-job requirement for that, to even sit for the exam, right? For those type of exams.
Some of them.
How does a veteran bridge that while they're still on active duty or through that transition? Is it through some of these programs on base? Do they get the actual hands-on?
If there's an on-the-job experience requirement, typically the certification agency will consider your military training and experience. Now, and I would expect that, well, I was going to say if you've participated in the SkillBridge program and had relevant experience, then that would take care of it as well.
Well, for NABCEP in particular, you have to actually be on the job and do solar installation work to be able to qualify.
Okay, I see.
Do some of the programs that you offer provide that?
Not yet.
No. So there's still an on-the-job requirement after.
That might be
So it's
the case.
complicated.
Yeah, it is. It's very complicated. Yeah.
Last question, I think, Laura, mainly for you and maybe the rest of the panel. From the field, one of the big gaps we're seeing is around preparing any worker, but in particular veterans, for the realities, the harsh realities of working in the field in solar and wind, right? You're in the sun, you're in the snow, you're in the rain. It's hard work. How do we screen them for the fire in the belly aspect of this thing? because otherwise it's just an academic exercise.
So I know for us, part of our SkillBridge program is connecting them directly with employers, with the employer that's going to hire them, and having them talk about that and send videos from the field and getting them engaged, and then they understand completely what they're getting into. But I will say a lot of service members are used to getting out in the dirt, in the heat, and the snow, and jumping out of planes and rappelling from towers. So a lot of the things that may scare civilians off from these jobs, they've kind of already done. So I think it's just a matter of being transparent. SkillBridge is a great opportunity, I think, to educate them about the job as well as giving them the skills for the job. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to
It's
that.
9 out of 10 of the individuals and almost always service members that go through our program are successful with the jobs they go into. Most of the time they're telling me that it's maybe 2 or 3 out of 10 for the hiring practices outside. So it's definitely a competitive advantage.
All right. Well, thank you. There's a lot of information. I hope it was useful and practical. Thank you to our panel, and we'll send it back to Dan. Thank you, everyone.
So we're going to break for the afternoon here. Please be back at 3:25. We have an exciting panel with energy entrepreneurs. This is always one of our favorite panels each year. And then after, we're going to hear from some of our fellows with their policy ideas. So go grab some coffee and come back ready for more. All right, everybody, welcome back. Thanks for coming back. We have 2 more sessions left in the day before our reception. So now we're going to hear from a panel of veterans turned energy entrepreneurs. This is traditionally one of our favorite sessions, a fan favorite, because we have a lot of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurially minded people in the audience. So looking forward to this. And then after, we'll have some flash talks from our fellows. Come on up.
Oh, you're going to take the hot seat right next to me.
Here we go.
Hi, everybody. How's everyone doing? Good? Energized after a break? That's great. Okay. So this is a fun topic. My name is Sarah Chamberlain. I'm the co-founder and managing director of Energy Foundry. We are a venture fund based here in Chicago. We invest in very early stage entrepreneurs across the energy, clean tech, climate tech sector. We've been doing it for about 10 years, which makes us ancient in this space. And I am joined here by our esteemed entrepreneurs and fellow panelists, and we're gonna have a good conversation. There's microphones, so I'll give you a heads up when I'm getting to kind of my last question. If you have things you wanna ask, feel free to come up and ask some questions. But I think where we'll start is we'll just kind of go down the row, and we'll start with you, Lauren, if you want to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and your company.
Sure, thanks, Sarah. Hello, everyone. I'm Lauren Gore. I'm from Houston, Texas, and I'm the managing principal at LDR Advisory Partners. We do, in some ways, change management work for, a wide range of clients. Being in Houston, Texas, you can't swing a stick without bumping into an energy company trying to process exactly what we're talking about, energy transition and other, global energy matters. So that's a lot of fun, and that keeps me busy. In addition, on a volunteer front, I'm the vice chair of an organization called Combined Arms, which is developing and delivering technology so that we can bring more efficiency to, the VSO community, and, have a lot of friends in the audience through that work as well. So try to stay engaged on the entrepreneurial front, but also on the community engagement front, and raising a couple kids and doing that whole thing. A 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. So stay busy. They came up to Chicago with me for this trip. So we were walking around Michigan Avenue in the rain, and it was a lot of fun. So yeah, that's me. Lot of experience in the energy space, and it's a big opportunity and a big challenge, and we're working through it.
Great. And next we have Chris Rawlings, who's the founder of Bowerbird. Tell us about you and the company.
Sure. Thank you for having me. Chris Rawlings, founder and chief energy officer, Bowerbird Energy from Richmond, Virginia. We're a design build energy services contractor. So we started mainly in energy efficiency and worked our way into renewables as well. So our main goal is to decarbonize existing buildings and help energy managers, facility operators reduce their O&M expenses, their carbon footprint, and just manage their total energy usage. So I actually got my start. I was in the Marine Corps from 03 to 08 as an aircraft mechanic. I did an energy audit on one of the aircraft hangars I was working at Fort Eustis as a contractor with Northrop Grumman with the Army Corps of Engineers, and we came up with this great plan for them to reduce their expenses and reduce their carbon footprint, and they did nothing with it. So out of pure frustration, I became an entrepreneur. So super glad to be here. Thanks for having me, and looking forward to the discussion.
Great. Will we see electric airplanes in the foreseeable future?
Electric airplane? I don't know. I left aviation eight years ago. I'm just having fun flying around my drone right now.
That's about it.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kevin Johnson, the co-founder of Clean Capital. And as folks asked me earlier, like, didn't you step away from the day-to-day at Clean Capital a few years ago? And the short answer is yes. And the question was, well, why did you put Clean Capital on your title? Have you done a bunch of things since? And short answer is yes, I have. So the former chief commercial officer of Clean Capital, co-founder, still an equity member of that team. And I put Clean Capital on my title. I wear a lot of different hats. I also serve as a board advisor for the Energy Defense Action Fund, senior advisor to Highland Electric Fleets, which is an electric fleet vehicle company that does school bus fleet electrification. But Clean Capital is near and dear to my heart. It's the first company I co-founded with another Army veteran, John Powers, a few years ago. And Clean Capital is in the business of aggregating distributed generation solar assets primarily, historically, operating assets, and basically bringing new capital investors into those assets. And I'm proud to say that I think our first no on the capital raise came from Sarah at Energy Foundry. So as we talk about the capital raising side, it's nice to talk about that story and then how that relates to other things I've done since and other businesses I've been involved with, which we'll talk about as we go.
Constructive criticism. Constructive criticism. So Kevin, we'll start with you, and I think some of you sort of started to touch on this, but how did you end up in energy?
Yeah, I think as hit on earlier today by John Munkin and Ben Richardson, our time served overseas, for me was highly informative. Being stationed in Beiji, Iraq in 2004 to 2005, watching oil fires burn and having my soldiers ask me every day, what are we doing here? When are we going home? And what are we doing here? It's hard not to think about what I wanted to do on the other side after I got out of my time in service. And really was a key motivating force into what I wanted to do next, excuse me. So that was kind of my thought process, and had a great chance to go to business school after my time in the Army, and then got my first start here in Chicago working for Acciona, which is a large wind company, and have progressed from wind, solar to battery storage over my time in the private sector. But really like thinking about what's important. What are the things I could do that are mission driven, that have a lot of opportunities and a lot of room for growth. And the clean energy space, stood out to me early on. I'm one of the older folks in this space, having been in the industry for over 15 years and having seen it evolve. It's both, frustrating to kind of see we're still in the same moment of transition, but obviously very inspiring to see, over the past 2 weeks especially, all the momentum moving forward into this space, and very validating to have made the decision a long time ago to be able to move forward in the industry.
Mm-hmm. Chris, talk about that decision. You alluded to the evaluation and the plan and the strategy and the frustration that ultimately led you to take the plunge. How did you decide to do what you're doing today? Talk a little bit more about that experience.
Yeah, so in 2007, I returned from my third deployment, and some would say in my command I was wound a little bit tight. So the Marine Corps just adopted a program called Airspeed, Lean Six Sigma, supply chain management, that type of stuff. And so they kind of stuck me over there with a completely different group, and I found myself, following people around, counting their steps, like doing all the legwork to get all the data. And part of that was understanding the overhead costs of utilities. So it really, my introduction into the energy space really came through cost savings. I wasn't really even thinking about the environmental aspect of it. Transitioned out, had a rough transition, found myself at Northrop Grumman finally in 2011. Talked about, they said, hey, aircraft work is slowing down. We're going through sequestration. We need you to save money. So I just became frustrated that they did nothing with the plan that we had when I saw, we turned kilowatt hours and BTUs into dollars and cents, and we showed the increased production, lower costs, mission readiness, and they just sat on a shelf. And so with all that extra time that I had, I was just Google searching energy efficiency, energy management, and everything that kept popping up was LED lighting. LED lighting is like the easy, low-hanging fruit, right, for companies to take. And so I just started making phone calls to figure out where can I get lights and how much do they cost. And one of the key resources that I actually was able to take advantage of was through the Institute for Veterans and Military Families out of Syracuse University. So in 2014, Florida State University was the second affiliate university to bring on that program, and I attended that program free of charge. And it was, no offense to people with an actual MBA, but it was like a crash course, like this is how you start up a business. And it was from that core training I was able to kind of put the resources and tools together to figure out, SWOT analysis, business model canvas, like all this basic stuff. Having no college degree, no training in business at all, I really think that was, the idea, the frustration, the little bit of experience I had, plus that core initial training is really what kind of helped propel me to to say, all right, it's time to go out on my own and start my own thing. Plus, I was bartending on Friday and Saturday night, so I was still making a little bit of money. So didn't make any money that first year, and then my wife finally said, "You're 30. You need to stop bartending." And she's probably the real reason why I went full board into it.
The COO.
Yeah.
The co-founder and
yeah.
COO. Lauren, we were talking a little bit about what is entrepreneurship. What does that mean to be an entrepreneur? So I'm going to pose that
this is a tough question.
to you.
Yeah, and I tried to pass the buck by asking Kevin Dolphin right before I walked up here what the answer to that question was, because I knew it was coming. I think in one sense it's just a really deep curiosity to solve problems that exist in, there's this saying, riches and niches kind of thing, right? There's this deep intellectual curiosity combined with a slightly higher risk tolerance to go down that rabbit hole. To pursue that reduction in friction or value creation, and maybe if you're smart, capture some of the value that's created. But I think it's complicated because there are a lot of different versions of it. You can be in a big company, you can be in a one-person company, you can be in a startup, you can be trying to figure out some new way to educate your children, right? I mean, entrepreneurship and innovation and the willingness to solve complex problems is not isolated to people who are kind of existing in businesses that they have co-founded or started, right? There's a lot of different versions of it, which makes it a really complex question. So, for me, I think it's funny enough because the Beijing oil refinery was kind of the starting point for me as well, being in Iraq and just seeing what sheer power the global energy industry has to take, for me, a kid from Cleveland, Ohio, and sort of transplant them halfway around the world and pay for their education in between. And then, there's a lot of, if you think about like what it takes to do anything in this world, that's a lot of force that the energy industry sort of possesses in our life. So I reflected on that and sort of just kept going deeper down the rabbit hole, became a energy attorney at a major law firm in Houston, Texas, doing deals and major infrastructure projects and just kind of continuing to follow the rabbit hole down, exploring sort of more niche value opportunities as they presented themselves. And because platforms aren't designed for us to capture alpha, in big companies, I said, well, let's try to find models to capture some of the value, a larger percentage of the value creation over time that we may or may not be successful in. But it's like the first step, that willingness to sort of to step over the red line, if you will, and just keep going. And again, I refer to Kevin Dolphin because 18 months ago, he and I talked. He's from Houston as well. He said, "Hey, I want to break into the energy industry," and there's no clear path to do that, right? And in the way that is sort of as he wanted it, which is heavy renewable, heavy sort of differentiated career journey. But like he just started walking down the journey, networking, spaces like this, doing every single event he could to sort of get deeper and deeper networked and understand where those niches, those value creating opportunities existed. So I have a lot of respect for what he did. And seeing him here today, we didn't coordinate, but seeing him here today is I texted him, I said, man, I'm just so proud that you manifested that dream. I think, but that is the definition of entrepreneurship for me, right? People who are willing to take that step and keep walking, even though it has a higher risk profile. And 18 months later, persevere and be in this room with the company doing exactly what they said they would do. So thanks, Kevin, and thanks for the question.
I love it.
I'm going to dogpile on that a little bit, and that's Lauren. I had the fortune of knowing Lauren since he was a cadet at West Point. It's amazing to see, 10 years later, all the great things you're doing, and how interconnected all of our worlds are. I was saying earlier, I can look around each table and tell a story about someone, experience together, or a question about a company, or challenging each other, like, hey, step out on faith to go try it out. And I have to, before we end the day, I want to highlight Dan Mish. I remember. It seems like yesterday we were sitting around talking about how there's no convening for veterans in clean energy. And I don't know if you remember it, I questioned you, I said, well, why don't you just go start it yourself and go do it? And here we are, look at what's been created in this entrepreneurial venture. Not everything's a business, not everything is a tech platform. All right? The value creation, seeing the value and seeing it through. We talk a lot, it's not easy. Not easy at all to do these things, but stepping out in faith and moving past that red line, I'd like to definitely commend and show my respect for Dan for everything you've done to create this amazing entrepreneurial venture for all of us.
Thank you, Dan.
Absolutely. Yeah, this business and this industry is all about relationships. People think venture capital is about funding tech startups, but it's really about relationships and just triangulating how do we use kind of each of our centers of gravity so that we can have real impact, and everybody starts that momentum. Like the momentum play of technology is only half the equation. It's the momentum of all of the relationships and the networks that we have. So I love that comment. I'm going to just shift a little bit. You know, entrepreneurship, Lauren, you were talking some about. It is not for the faint of heart. There's all different flavors of it. I want each of you to kind of think back over your career in the risks that you have taken and some of the challenges that you have faced and had to overcome. Talk about maybe an example that stands out to you. What did you learn from that experience? How did it sort of contribute to who you are and where you are today? And I'll let whoever wants to start.
I'm happy to jump in first. I want to really highlight Clean Capital today. It seems like yesterday we started that company in 2015. We had worked through all of 2015 to think through how we want to structure it. Had funding lined up, but of course everything takes 3 times as long as you expect it to take. And I had finally convinced my wife that I was going to step away from my pretty good day job at Canadian Solar, where I was leading the federal team at Canadian Solar. We had just supplied the modules for Fort Detrick, Fort Benning, Kings Bay, and the Houston VA. So we took inside Canadian Solar from $0 in sales to $100 million in the first year, and things were going well. And meantime, my battle buddy John Powers is nudging me on the side, saying, "Hey, we should start our own company, starting with $0." I'm like, "That sounds like a great idea." But we had the funding relatively lined up, and it was pretty well structured that we knew we would be able to fund ourselves for the first year. But it got delayed 3 months. And right around Christmas time frame, my other co-founder, Tom Byrne, had mentioned he already left his law firm that he was at, and was conveying that it might be helpful if we can kind of bring some funds together to make sure we could pay his mortgage for December, which we did. John and I did. I remember mentioning to my wife, like, I'm quitting my pretty good job and I'm going to go pay my co-founder's mortgage, but trust me, this is all going to work out. But I just highlight that having faith and trust together as a team, really solidified us for that first year. That trust and the camaraderie that built was really, I think, a tremendous building experience. We kind of continued that story. We had moved forward to one of our first major deals at Clean Capital. I was Chief Commercial Officer leading our acquisition business, our acquisition practice. And on the day that we closed our first acquisition, it was a $20 million acquisition. It got delayed all weekend, and we wound up closing on a Monday morning. Don't ever close a deal on a Monday. It's terrible. And we started in the morning at 5 a.m., wound up closing at right around 3 p.m. All the wires cleared and everything, and I had been awake for 4 days straight and still in my pajamas. We closed the deal. I was working from home, and literally opened the door of my office, having just closed our first major deal, $20 million deal, and my kids had just walked in from school. And the first question was like, "Can you help, give XYZ a snack and help get the groceries out of the car?" So I think just the humility of these things, they could both be really big and exciting, but also having the humility of that, at the end of the day, you're still a mom or dad, and have business to do at home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for us, I'll jump in. In 2017, I brought on I was introduced to a Vietnam veteran who had previously run an energy management company in the 80s and 90s selling building automation systems. Very, very successful person. And for some reason, he took a liking to me and kind of gave me the mentorship and the confidence that I needed. Being somebody that was in aviation for 10 years and having practically zero experience in the energy space, it was difficult. I constantly was battling this imposter syndrome and not thinking I could take on these bigger projects. So having that mentor and having that person, what I perceived as like this really high stature person, like having confidence in me, really gave me the confidence to start taking risk and to start taking on larger projects. When COVID hit, all of our projects, I would say 90% of our projects got completely put on hold, and they said, "We're not worried about energy efficiency right now, we're worried about air quality." So where does air quality fit in the realm of, your expertise? And so we immediately started pulling together the resources that we have. We started following the air quality experts. We started pulling in the HVAC engineers and building a team. And our first contract was 24 restaurants that we had to do. And we knew that this project was going to get a lot of press coverage. So the whole time I'm thinking as a business owner, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to do this project. And all these scientists are going to come out of the woodwork and say, like, you did it wrong, and this guy's a fraud. And, there's all kinds of stuff going on during COVID, as I'm sure you all are aware, with businesses and certain businesses kind of taking advantage. And so I came up with a million reasons to say no. But what ended up happening was I was able to orchestrate and build a team of people that were very confident in what their abilities were. And it was just my job to orchestrate. And so I think, when you think about taking risks, it's not just about you and your thought process. It's more largely about the team that you can bring together and the team that you can orchestrate to provide solutions. And it was a great project. And it even, after the fact, we really realized like what we were capable of as a team. We were no longer just a lighting company or just, electrical company or whatever it was. Like we really kind of, it gave the confidence to the entire team that, yeah, we have the ability to take on risks, to pivot, to do the things that small businesses need to do when the opportunity, arises. So.
And this, my friends, is why VCs back a team. That is the example of what investors look for. That capability, the thought process, the notion of being a leader, coordinating, responding to situations. You may have zero plan going in, but they figure it out. So that's, I love that story.
I'm raising around soon.
I'll give you some tips before you go ask.
Thank you for sharing that. Lauren?
It's complicated. Everything we do in life has a certain sort of risk factor, right? And so I think the question was how do we deal with risk?
An example of a risk you had to take or a challenge you had to overcome.
Well, the obvious are like when you step away from a more established job to do something a little bit more entrepreneurial. But like everything has risk, right? Maybe that's the sort of thing that I've processed is like you stay in a big company, it has risk. You go to a one-person startup, it has risk, and there's sort of gradations in between. So I think it's really just understanding that it is an ever-present force and managing it and however you personally manage risk, right? There's risk in talking to the person at the table next to you as opposed to go into your cell phone and respond to emails, to your buddies or text messages, right? There's risk there, risk in sort of not being responsive enough to your organic team, risk in being rejected socially from the person next to you, right? There are risks in all of this stuff. So it's what do you want, having a clear understanding of what do you want, like where do you think that value opportunity is, like is there some inherent value opportunity in like understanding what everyone in this room can do and what their companies do, right? If that is something valuable to you, then it is worth the risk to like maybe be a little obnoxious and say hi to everyone, right? And if that's not something that you find valuable, then like don't take the risk, right? Just sort of answer your colleague's email, right? Because there's more risk in being unresponsive. So like that's a very micro example, but I think the general point is that everything we do, entrepreneurship, corporate entrepreneurship or whatever you want to call that, entrepreneurship I think is a buzzword, but whatever you do, like there's a certain risk premium, risk factor associated with it. So my sort of risk as a lawyer, like I think about risk a lot. So like my version of processing risk is just to understand that it exists in all situations and then to adjust for it and then to sort of move out, right? I'm a former infantry officer, so it's it's those are like the devil and the angel on my shoulder, the lawyer and the infantry officer. Right? One is saying don't move, the other one's saying move faster. So that maybe that answers the question not perfectly.
That's great. I love that.
Yeah.
Where do I want to go next in the remaining time? So I have two more questions that I'll sort of go through. I'm going to try and leave some time. So start thinking about questions that you have, if you have any. So two different acronyms that are sort of quickly evolving. About 5 years ago, nobody knew what ESG was or DEI. And so as you think about one, either, both of those, and kind of the evolution of those. What has your experience been in either one or both of those acronyms, and how do you think about yourself in the context of that, your journey?
Happy to jump in first. From again, having been in the sector for quite some time, ESG was definitely one of the acronyms you heard a lot coming up. And for me, I never got too trapped into being defined by is it environmentally sustainable? Is it is it right governance? Rather, do I feel good about what I'm doing? Do I feel mission driven? Am I around the right people that I want to be working with? And then am I reaching back and helping bring other folks up that need an opportunity, want an opportunity, should be afforded the opportunity to have a shot? And I think the great thing about vets is that we inherently do that. That's why we're all here. That's why folks are watching, right? They want to be connected. They want to do good things. So now that you mentioned DEI, it's interesting having these definitions to put around things that we just, in my view, just inherently know are the right things to do, is to think about access and opportunities. And I think the past few years for me, it's not the kind of thing I've thought too much about growing up. I grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Played sports. Was always able to excel on merit, and I was always supported in that, which I very much appreciated and have benefited from greatly. And for me, as I think about DEI initiatives and efforts, I'm very, very conscious now to think about, with all the benefits that and things I've earned over time, how can I do a better job at opening the door for access, whether it be raising money, making introductions. As folks know in this room, I'm a consummate networker, but I enjoy it. I really do enjoy it. I don't do it because for any reasons other than it's really fun for me to see these connections being built. So around DEI initiatives, I've been very focused over the past year or two to think about, how do I use and leverage my network to increase opportunities for others that may not otherwise have that shot. And I encourage you all to do that as well if you have a chance.
Well, if I could piggyback on Kevin's comment, if that's okay, Chris, I think those comments are really squishy comments, right? Like part of what they mean is in the eye of the beholder, right? So what does DEI mean to an EPC construction firm with 90% white male workforce, right? What does it mean? Like, how do you effectively translate like what the spirit of that concept is into that business is a lot different than maybe a nonprofit or governmental sort of understanding of that definition. And so I think the translation piece, translating these abstract concepts that mean something a little bit different to a lot of people, such that we continue to move the ball forward, as Kevin said, to do what's right ultimately, I think is what's very fascinating to me. And that's where the big opportunity is, right? Like there is no definition, right? It's sort of whatever you think it means. And so I think it's incumbent upon the people in this room to sort of activate it in a way that is meaningful and relevant, but in your own way, right? Because it can be maybe ineffective if sort of you take a sort of very high level, broad definition and try to square peg round hole, right, into your business. Which is what we're talking about, entrepreneurship, right? Like how do you actually deliver value for your shareholders or your employees? I think you have to really be thoughtful about how you're applying these concepts such that you move the ball forward and capture the value that your kind of business thesis seeks to capture.
I think with ESG, most people don't know what it is that are running businesses. So I've been very fortunate to be in the position of helping explain what ESG is to business owners that are manufacturing lawn equipment or running a hair salon or whatever it is. So they just need, most business owners just need education on what exactly that means. With DEI, I mean, we have taken a very unorthodox approach to acquiring and hiring talent. So number one, from a business standpoint, you always want your employees to be a representation of your clients and who you're selling to, right? So if it's important for them to want to talk to someone that looks like them, acts like them, has the same background as them, and they can make that genuine connection, I think that's very, very important, particularly on the sales and business development side where things start, right? So that's the business aspect of it. But the other aspect of it is kind of doing what's right and being unorthodox by it, in the sense that, you know, when someone comes to me and asks me for a job, I really look at, are you a constant learner? Are you a constant person that's going to push yourself to educate yourself? Do you have a good emotional intelligence? Can you stay balanced in sometimes stressful situations, or as a small business, as I said, pivoting and moving and things changing all the time, and remaining calm when you know, something happens at home that may affect you at work or whatever it is? And are you going to mesh well with the team? I'll tell you right now, one of my most successful senior project managers, he started off making $14 an hour. And he started off making $14 an hour because he had just gotten out of prison, because he was a former heroin addict. And now he's getting ready to buy his own house. So when you talk about doing the right things, and again, there's risks associated with hiring folks like that. But when you see those success stories, I mean, talk about diversity. I mean, talk about the feel-good story of somebody that, you know, came from a very rough upbringing, saw some really rough times, and is now, you know, I mean, creating just an amazing life for him and his family. And so when I think about diversity, it's not just religious beliefs, sexual orientation, skin color. It's kind of everything, you know, where your background was and kind of what you bring to the table, because your mindset is shaped on your experiences. It's shaped by the environment that you've been in your whole entire life. And it's the most important thing for a business, for you to form and gel nicely with the team so that you can provide, you know, the great service to the clients.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So I'm going to suggest that anyone that has a question, make your way up to the microphone, and I will ask questions, and we might do round robin so that we can integrate folks. So the last thing I'll ask you guys to comment on is just advice for people in the room who might be contemplating either moving into the energy industry, taking a big change, a big step in their career. What advice might you have for them? And I'm looking at eyes to see who wants
to jump in.
Go for it.
I'd be a little bit biased. I serve in the advisory board, so I kind of know the stats of who's in the room and who's in the energy space, so I know it's dominated by folks already in clean energy. As noted earlier, the opportunities looking forward are absolutely tremendous. You know, having been in this space for 15 years, as noted from my previous examples, is not been that steady, very challenging, and not to say it's going to be easy going forward. But the opportunities out there are really, really tremendous, especially if this Inflation Reduction Act passes. I mean, there's decades worth of just tremendous work and opportunities and startup opportunities. I'd also just highlight that not everyone's an entrepreneur, right? I mean, I'd spent 5 years, 7 years in the corporate industry. I had time value of money. I think it would have been more lucrative, but it's never a wrong time to start if you want to start your own business. And there's, especially in the veteran community, tons of support. From an advice perspective, you know, I don't know where I heard it, but I heard it recently. It may be cliche. The saying of "you only live once," you know, I can't stand that. Right? To me, it just makes no sense. Like, it's just so, you know, squishy and ubiquitous. And I heard somewhere recently, you know, you only die once. And how true is that statistically? I mean, you only die once, right? And I say that to say, you know, every day you wake up, you can start over again, right? In any possible way. Whether something in your personal life is not going right, the next day you could change it. If you're in a company and you can't stand your boss, you can leave, right? There's plenty of opportunities. You know, so, you know, last words is, you know, you only die once, and think about that, right? As you go forward, just because you're doing something for so long doesn't mean you can't change tomorrow, and there's always a tomorrow until there's no more. That's great.
Yeah, if you want to get in the energy industry, please go to your iPhone right now and download the Energy Sense podcast that I host. No, but you know, it's use the resources that you have, especially people in this room that are veterans. There's a ton of resources out there. I mentioned the IVMF earlier. You've got Bunker Labs. You've got Veterans Institute for Procurement. You've got SCORE, the SBA. I mean, you name it. There are a ton of resources out there. If you want to dive deeper and get into very specific things, you've got Schneider Electric University, Khan Academy, MIT OpenCourseWare. You don't have to go to college to be smart. You don't have to go to college to learn things, right? So use the resources that you have. And then the next thing is network. If you're not an outgoing person and you don't like talking to people and you're an introvert, it's gonna be very hard for you. I'm not saying it can't be done. You know, there's certain, you know, I guess IT software people, you can kind of create a product and then go out there and start to pick on you. But like, it's easier if you're outgoing and you're able to meet people and build that network. You know, tap into industry associations. So for me, for example, I leverage Association of Energy Engineers, Society of American Military Engineers, you know, Atlantic Council, doing the fellowship with Dan. I mean, policy is a realm that I am not involved in on the daily, but it was challenging, but I got to meet so many cool people. I mean, that's the reason why I do the podcast, because I bring on smart people and I just learn from them selfishly every day. So just do as much as you can to learn as much as you can and meet people. You'll be surprised how many people actually want to help, especially in the beginning years when you're just like, hey, I'm just starting off. It's almost like a pity thing. And they're like, oh, we'll give them a contract. We'll let them swap the lights out in our hair salon for $1,000, you know? But that's how you get started.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, quickly, I want to get to questions. I think y'all said it well. I mean, that's it. It's a highly fragmented market, which means it's highly relational, right? The value is in the niches, right? So you've got to get really sophisticated and smart about the niches, and that can mean what the niche can mean a lot of different things. So you just have to get really smart about the niche and then capture some value after you've solved the problem. So that's it. Great. They said it all.
Looks like we have somebody.
Hi, I'm Kevin Doffing. I'm Lauren Gore's ghostwriter. So with all the people watching, everybody here that's excited about entrepreneurship right now, I'd love to hear if you three weren't doing what you're doing right now and had to start a new business in this industry, what would that business be? And just get the ball rolling. I would start a heat pump HVAC contractor.
That's what you would do?
Oh, absolutely.
I would second that. You know, again, I stepped aside from the day-to-day clean.
I want to also be.
There's a 36-week lead time on product right now.
You know what? I just mentioned to Lauren on the sidelines the workforce discussion. I think there's this tremendous opportunity right now in the people business. I mean, for the investment tax credit that will be accompanied to projects, to clean energy projects, the baseline is 6%. If you want the full 30% ITC, which your CFO would never let you not do that, you need to both hire prevailing wage labor, union labor, and have apprentice workers in your program. I can tell you that there is could be a major gap there, and I think if you're good in the business of bringing people together, I think there's tremendous opportunities in that space. Tremendous.
As a kind of a classical energy manager, when you talk about niches, I would probably look at motors and drives and air compression systems. They're very energy intensive, and I think that's not as crowded of a market as some of the other energy conservation measures out there. But one of the things that I think Bowerbird Energy kind of fills the gap of is there's a lot of contractors, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, you name it, that are still in the old mindset of how they do service contracts with existing buildings, how they build buildings ground up. They're not thinking from energy conscious mindset. They're not thinking, they constantly think, oh, it's just more expensive. So I think, being in the contracting space and having an energy and environmental management focus is really, I think that's kind of the place to be. Now, don't come compete with us in Virginia, but start your own thing wherever you are.
Yeah, I think, Kevin, it's a good question, and I personally am sort of interested in the lower middle market industrial sector, sort of the inputs to the inputs that make things move, and Kevin knows this very well. I'm pretty big bull on that space, given some of the macros, the baby boomers, the sort of the need for additional capex into those businesses that are done in the right way, right? Done in an energy efficient way, and not sort of done in the way they were done in the 70s, right? There's been sort of a massive investment in sort of the buildings and machines that power those businesses. So I think I personally am very, very bullish on that space. I think, look, but quite frankly, in sort of a robust capitalist economy, it's it's like a lot of like freedom of maneuver, right? So if you get smart enough about a segment and you want to go, explore it from tech to, inter-organizational sort of coordination, right, to EPC to whatever, right? Like there's ways to make money in any of those. So it's really not a question of which area is a good area to find value, like where value creation is possible. Like that's sort of not the question. The real question is like what area, what segment are you motivated enough to like walk through the minefield of entrepreneurship to arrive at that value creation and spend like the long lonely nights, your 18 months sort of, exploring and getting integrated into like that's the real question. Which space gets you excited enough to like walk through that lonely, dark journey until you come out on the other end when you see the sun rising and you can make some magic happen. So for me, it's industrials, lower middle market, and but it could be different for everybody as long as you want to fight that fight.
And I'll just say real quick, just one of the things that I see, one of the issues I see with people that have ideas of starting their own business is entrepreneurs have a tendency to drown in opportunity. There's just so much that you could do. I started going door to door selling light bulbs. Right, so like find a niche and start somewhere and flesh it out until it's done, and if that doesn't work, pivot and go to something else. I'm not saying that you can't juggle one or two things, I'm just saying it's more difficult. So my advice is just find that niche first and go as deep as possible, because electrical contractors could have done the exact same thing I was doing, right? They could have sent people out selling LEDs and done the energy calculations and all that, but they didn't. They were in an old mindset. Find a traditional business sector that's operating with a legacy mindset. Do it a little bit differently, tweak it, whether that's through services or supply chain or whatever it is, and go deep into that niche. And that'd be my advice.
Focus.
Yeah.
And Mr. Heat Pump, I have a technology for you wherever you went. I have a technology for you, and I have a technology for you. So.
And one last thing I'd say on the capital side is like what Chris is mentioning, it doesn't take a ton of capital to start, right? Especially as veterans, there are a lot of ways to leverage your GI Bill, grants, especially with this new legislation, right? So there are ways to kind of start with pockets of money that aren't dilutive, and or you're not behind the gun of having to behind expensive capital right away. And you could learn and pivot as you grow, and which I think will be critical when you do want to raise larger funds from Energy Foundry. They're going to want to show that where your experience, where you're on the experience curve, and where the team is at from a relationship perspective.
Yeah. Well, I think we are over, so please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists. And thank you for having us.
Good stuff. Learn more about the business.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Great work, brother.
Thank you. Great work.
So for our last session, we're going to mix it up a little bit. Instead of having a panel, we'll have a series of speakers. Our 4 speakers are current fellows in the Veterans Advanced Energy Fellowship. The fellowship is something that we started 3 years ago. It is a year-long leadership and policy development program. Applications are currently open for the next cohort through next week, August 15th. As you look at the requirements, you'll see there is no minimum military service, no experience requirement, no specific education requirements, because we are looking for a diversity of everybody that's coming out of the military. We're looking for idea makers, for passionate people, and people who are going to make a big difference in the community and building this community. So the plan here, the program, I'll invite each speaker to the stage. They have about 5 minutes for a flash talk or like a mini TED talk. We'll come back for some questions after. So if a question strikes you, because we're on a tight timeline, line right up to the mic there. Otherwise, I have some questions for them as well. And with that, I'd like to invite Jennifer Monfray.
All right, what a great honor it is to be here. I am Jennifer Monfray. I am a U.S. Army veteran, and I currently work in clean transportation at a nonprofit called CalSTART. I would like to talk about leveraging the Department of Defense procurement to address climate and competition by putting rare earth minerals at the top of the shopping list. Slide. The largest ground war in Europe since World War II has resuscitated the idea that we really don't want to be tied to a global fossil fuel market. Slide. This is not a new idea. Every president since I was born has made this a key talking point. And yes, I know that's a lot of presidents. Is this time different? I say potentially yes. Slide. Commercially available clean tech is ready to facilitate the transition. The bipartisan infrastructure legislation is bringing $65 billion to the table to build lots of clean techs in our communities, in our cities, and in our states. And I didn't forget the $379 billion, right? But even with all this, there is a sizable gap that does need attention, because the basic building block of these technologies and in the clean energy economy is rare earth minerals. Wind turbines, solar cells, and battery cells used in electric vehicles and in stationary storage, they use up pretty much an alphabet soup from the periodic table. So here they are. Now, contrary to the moniker, rare earth minerals really aren't that rare. In fact, most of them are quite plentiful, even here in the United States. But they don't arrange themselves in nice, thick bands through quartz. Instead, they're dispersed. They're not very concentrated. And so it makes it very difficult to source, and they are very expensive. But other countries have become very fast movers in these markets. And some of the largest suppliers of these rare earth minerals are contenders for the title of bad actor in the global community. Slide. For example, so the standard lithium-ion battery, which I deal with a lot because I deal in zero emissions transportation, has basically 4 rare earth minerals at its core: lithium, nickel, cobalt, and magnesium. And as you can see, checking the leaderboard, who's up there? China and Russia. It is time for the US to catch up. However, compared to other countries who are pursuing an aggressive, full economy approach to this, the US, and we heard about this earlier, kind of has a piecemeal approach, touching here, touching there, leaning heavily on the private sector, which is recovering from COVID, and also is dealing with inflationary pressures. Next slide. So it's time to call in the cavalry, call in the Marines, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Coast Guard too, because the current piecemeal approach really cannot shift the supply chain in time in the same way that the Department of Defense can. Slide. By leveraging DoD research, procurement, and contracting, and applying them to the whole spectrum of clean tech, the supply chain, including rare earth minerals, slide, the US can secure these strategic resources and power up the market and the industries that supply them. Slide. What is required is for policymakers to prioritize funding and approve initiatives that directly link to our own rare earth mineral supply chain and the clean technologies that they support. It is time to move beyond the Army pilots that dabble in the deployment of non-combat electric vehicles and past the slow but steady testing of microgrids at Marine bases. We need big initiatives across all of the services. We need more than a market signal. What we need is a national call to arms. This will move investments off the sidelines, and as a bonus, and a very important one, the DoD can apply requirements to ensure that supply chain operations and the sourcing are built with safety and sustainability as a core. Because that's something that, honestly, we all know would take years for regulators in the private sector to litigate, right? Next slide. Today's geopolitical environment and the increasing impacts of climate change will not allow us enough time to allow the commercial market to grow domestic capacity and supplies in its own time. It is time to use the power and the might of the US Department of Defense to build and defend the rare earth mineral and related clean tech industries here at home. It is time to align our national and our energy security with our nation's climate strategy while ensuring global competitiveness for the future. Thank you.
Jen, stay with me here.
Well, we've got questions.
Yeah, so anybody have questions for Jen, please find yourself at the mic. I do want to ask, what is the Department of Defense doing today? What are they doing right that you want to see more of?
Sure. You know, it was really interesting doing this and looking at this as by policy, because as I was talking with some of my other fellows, like, it was moving so fast. And so I was like, this is my policy, and then something would happen. Okay, no, this will change. And so, so during the spring, those of you that follow us probably know that within the IIJA, but also within the Defense Appropriation Act, there were movements to really look at rare earth minerals. And you'll see a lot of compliments with, oh, just like the silicon chips, we've got to make sure that this happens. And so, so there is funding that is out there. Kind of mining industries are waiting for those grants. The national laboratories are looking for those grants to be coming as that money kind of doles out. So I wouldn't say that it's being ignored. But the thing is that the problem is just so vast. And even with, I would say maybe this isn't the solution piece, but another piece of the gap is that even within the negotiations, as much as last week, during the negotiations about the, I call it the Reconciliation Act, because that's what I've been talking about for so long. But even with that, you'll find OEMs, manufacturers of electric vehicles, who did not want the Buy America standards put in there, right? Because they don't feel that they can be competitive because it's not ready. And so this is really that next step is like, okay, like our private sector companies need to still depend on foreign sources. So let's not handicap them. Let's use the Department of Defense to build that up while they can compete in the global market at the same time.
Thank you. Let's hear for Jennifer. So next I'll bring up Kendra Ryan.
I'll attempt it. Well, let's see how that works with these.
Do you want me to click for you?
No, I'll try. I'll just leave it here. Hello, everybody. My name is Kendra Ryan, and today I propose to you how the Department of Defense can lead the U.S. transition to renewable energy. How DoD can proactively use their lands to help deploy 2 terawatts of wind and solar to mitigate our climate crisis. And we have a climate crisis. It's a national security threat impacting food and water availability, displacing people from their homes, and as many of the speakers talked about today, impacting military operations. More than 30 bases are facing increased risk from higher sea levels, and many others are being impacted by natural disasters with increased severity over the past. We need clean energy to address this climate crisis, and we need these clean systems now. The President's administration has set a goal of 100% clean electricity by 2035. And as you can see from this graph, we have a long way to go to get there. All of this clean energy will take a lot of space. And fortunately, DoD has that. As the 5th largest land management agency, it manages over 8.8 million acres, an area the size a little bit larger than the state of Maryland. DoD can use this space to accelerate deployment by proactively planning for renewables. Proactive planning starts with systematic assessments to site renewable projects. DoD does not currently have a framework for proactive planning of renewables. Instead, it's reacting to developers' requests. Developers are bringing those requests to the services and DoD for approval, and as part of that process, the clearinghouse is assessing military mission compatibility. But that's not the whole picture. It's just one aspect. Proactive planning means assessing potential, includes all these other aspects, including the resource potential, as you can see here, where solar potential is overlaid with military bases, and supporting the infrastructure needed as well. Proactive planning and assessments also includes economic viability and sustainability, including environmental and social aspects, in addition to that military mission compatibility that I spoke to before. Using DoD lands for renewable projects is not a new concept. Photovoltaics, wind farms, and a geothermal facility are currently in operation. And in 2020, over 2,000 projects were in operation. So with these projects, there's an established framework for land management and energy production and sale. And this leads to the value added for DoD. There are economic opportunities, including payments for leased lands and revenue from energy production. Increased energy security and resilience that a couple speakers talked about earlier today as well, for both the individual installations and more at the national level. And DoD would be seen as a leader in the whole of government approach towards the US goal of 100% clean electricity, an approach advocated for by the administration. The Department of Defense need not react to developers, but proactively plan for renewables by conducting systematic assessments on their lands. Thank you.
Thank you, Kendra. I let you all off easy with Jennifer, but really we would like to hear questions from the audience if you have them. So as you think, as you listen, please step on up. Kendra, I do want to ask you, for the way that the House is currently working, what kind of problems is that creating within the industry and for siting these projects on DoD lands?
So the clearinghouse is responsible for assessing impacts, how it may affect mission compatibility, and then they are proposing mitigating terms or minimizing the risk and hopefully not canceling the project. But again, that doesn't get to the heart of it, which is that DoD needs to be more proactive in assessing more the complete picture, not just military mission compatibility.
And we're talking about projects on DoD property. Is this for powering military bases only, or how does this apply to the private industry who also probably wants to build public-private partnership projects?
Exactly, both. It could be for internal usage or for public-private partnerships. Somebody mentioned it here today. When Texas grid goes down, a base can supply energy to the surrounding community. So it comes in many options, but the point is that DoD needs to understand its resource and how that can best benefit our communities and ultimately our national goals.
All right, Kendra, seeing no other questions, thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everyone.
All right, next up we have Alex Buchanan.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alex Buchanan. I'm here today to tell you how offshore wind represents an exciting and potentially transformational opportunity for the state of California, but why the state needs to enact strong policy support in order to turn that opportunity into a reality. So while stationed in San Diego during my time in the Navy, I spent a number of days navigating in the beautiful coastal waters of California. This is when I experienced firsthand that the wind just offshore is incredibly strong and consistent. While standing watch on the bridge of my destroyer, I remember always having to take note of the wind speed and direction while we conducted training exercises like man overboard drills, live fire events, or flight operations. California, of course, is home to one of the best offshore wind resources in the entire world. It's so windy that the National Renewable Energy Lab estimates that the total offshore wind potential, which is over 200 gigawatts, is more than enough to easily supply the entire state's peak electrical load. In order to take advantage of this abundant renewable resource, the state should pass legislation that sets an offshore wind procurement target of no less than 20 gigawatts by 2045. While 20 gigawatts is just a fraction of the total potential, it's big enough to drive the economies of scale needed to bring down costs and to incentivize the creation of a brand new offshore wind industry on the West Coast. There is precedent for this type of state support. California has been a champion for renewable energy technology development, and it once played a leading role in growing the onshore wind industry. Thousands of wind turbines, like the one shown here near Palm Springs, were installed as early as the 1980s. However, since then, most of the onshore wind locations in the state have already been developed. So for the past decade or so, California has relied very heavily on solar power for new projects. By relying too much on solar, however, the California grid, even this year, has already reached the point where there's too much solar power during the middle of the day, and then there's a rapid shortfall in the evening and at night. So as you can see in this figure, as the sun sets and solar power rapidly declines, the price of energy skyrockets because that drop in solar has to be met with a corresponding ramp up of dirty fossil fuel peaker plants. Offshore wind, though, the blue line here, can play an important complement to solar power by peaking in the evening and holding steady throughout the night. So not only can offshore wind generate during the most valuable times of the day, it also has a higher capacity factor, which means it's steadier, stronger, and more reliable than other competing wind resources. Because of this, a state modeling report has actually found that a future grid that incorporates offshore wind is more reliable, more efficient, and cheaper than a grid without offshore wind. So in addition to producing abundant, affordable, clean energy, there are a host of other benefits that offshore wind development will bring to California. As we've already seen in Europe, and we're beginning to see now on the East Coast, offshore wind projects generate millions of dollars in tax revenue that support local coastal communities. They encourage manufacturing and jobs to come to the state, in fact, tens of thousands of jobs, especially jobs suited for veterans, like we've been talking about. And they bring much needed investments in port infrastructure and manufacturing. Offshore wind, of course, is also less vulnerable to one of the dangerous threats facing the state. As we've seen in the news over the past several years, wildfires have ravaged California, and unfortunately the threat is only growing due to prolonged drought and higher temperatures. We now know, in fact, that many of the most devastating fires in recent history were started by sparks from electric transmission lines. While many other types of renewable energy projects will require new transmission to be built across areas of high fire risk, offshore wind can mitigate this risk because offshore wind farms can connect directly to coastal cities with undersea cables. So if offshore wind has all these benefits and advantages, why are there 0 turbines in the waters off California right now? Why do we need a procurement target? One of the main reasons is that the very deep waters of the Pacific require wind turbines to be installed on floating foundations like the one shown here. Floating wind technology is still in the early stages of development, but with strong state policy support, they can bring down costs just like we've seen with onshore wind and with solar. Besides this technological challenge, offshore wind projects also require massive investments in ports, manufacturing, transmission, and workforce training that are often too big for any one developer to solve by themselves. So to illustrate the impact of strong policy support for offshore wind, just take a look at the difference in the East Coast and the West Coast in offshore wind project activity. Many states along the East Coast have already enacted different state policies that support offshore wind development. And as you can see, that's helped to accelerate dozens of projects and bring in billions of dollars of investment. California, even though it has a stronger wind resource than the East Coast, lags way behind in developing its offshore wind industry. You can see here that 8 different states along the Mid-Atlantic and New England have already enacted specific offshore wind procurement targets, whether through mechanisms like power purchase agreements or offshore renewable energy credits. My proposal is actually quite simple. It's for California to follow these examples, and in doing so, they can lead the way for the West Coast to enact similar policies. So if California wants to benefit from all the advantages that offshore wind can bring to the state, it needs to enact a statewide procurement goal of no less than 20 gigawatts by 2045. 20 gigawatts is ambitious, but it's achievable, and it's the size needed to drive the economies of scale that will bring down costs and encourage companies and investment to come to the state. By making this strong and clear commitment, California can diversify its renewable energy portfolio, it can enhance grid reliability and energy security, and become a leader in floating offshore wind development in the Pacific. Thank you all for your time.
Alex, thank you again. I'll invite people who have questions to the mic to line up here. I do want to ask, what is happening in California already? What exists today? Is it just nothing? No one's talking about this at all?
They're talking about it. Thankfully, they're starting to talk about it. And actually, last year we saw exciting development with what's called Assembly Bill 525. But what that does essentially is it directs the California Energy Commission, sort of the state energy research agency, to simply create a planning target and to study the potential for offshore wind development in the state. And so my proposal is that studying the target is not enough, and that the logical next step would be an actual procurement target.
Chris? Hey, Alex, great presentation. Are floating wind turbines, do they exist now, or are they?
These right here are floating wind turbines.
Okay.
This is a pilot project off the coast of Portugal, so there are several pilot projects like this. So we already know the technology works. It's just a matter now of bringing it to scale and bringing down costs.
Yeah, Alex. A lot of innovation has come in different places from the CCAs, which are like trying to get out of the fixed utilities. Is there any interest from the CCAs in this? Because I know that they've had a really hard time with community solar. Would this be an option, and have they expressed any interest?
I don't have personal experience with CCAs. However, what I've gathered is that because CCAs tend to be smaller than state-owned utilities like we have on the East Coast, for example, in some ways it's probably more difficult for them to contract for this offshore wind energy because these plants are in the gigawatt scale. When they put out RFPs, they're looking for 100, 200 megawatts. And most of the time, that's going to come from solar. So I didn't get into the specifics of how the legislation would work in California, but it would likely involve some sort of central procurement authority so that the state would buy or contract for the offtake and then distribute that somehow financially to the CCAs. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Who's opposed and why?
Excellent question. Of course, many industries, notably fishing, though of course that's not unique to California. We've already seen that on the East Coast. And of course there are ways to develop responsibly. Of course, we're not going to build out the full 200 gigawatts because that would take away from the other coastal uses that we cherish in California. So fishing for sure. Of course, there are important environmental concerns as well. That would be part of the surveying activities and part of the construction and operation plans that any developer submits to ensure that we're not damaging the environment, that we're being good stewards. So those are the main ones that I can think of, but do you have any others in mind?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Alex.
Well, thanks all.
So for our last talk, I'll bring up Kevin Doffing.
The state of Texas is a leader in energy. We're the capital of the world for energy for a lot of cases. And it's not just what's below the ground. When people think of Texas, they think of oil and gas. It's also what's above. So when you think of it, it's wind, it's solar, it's the oil and gas. We started 100 years ago with the discovery of oil in Spindletop outside of Beaumont, the shale boom in East Texas that bled over into South Texas and West, as well as wind and solar. We're the #1 state for wind, and we'll fast approach and take over California as the #1 for solar. Next, we need to invest in geothermal policy, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about. And there's only two things you really got to know to make this happen. We need to deregulate, we need to invest. Two things that Texans love to do. If there's anything we love more than anything, it's deregulating. You can just look at our grid. It's a perfect example. I come from Texas. My name's Kevin Doffing. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer with Clean Energy Services. We're an O&M provider for large-scale wind and energy storage. Now, when we're talking about geothermal, we're talking about 24/7 clean baseload power, something that is secure, and energy security equals national security. This is a very simple technology. You heard Kendra talk about it a little bit earlier. You're basically just bringing the hot water out of the ground that's deep down, not much different than what we do already with our natural gas and oil drilling. It's a lot bigger hole. You bring it to the surface, the steam releases, and then you turn a turbine. Same way we do with natural gas, coal, or nuclear. So this is a very safe, stable technology that has not really been invested in. And the reason we haven't invested in it is because we try to follow a capital structure that is primarily developed and used for existing technologies. When we look at the cap structure for geothermal that's been tried to be deployed over the last few decades, we ignore the fact that we need a government involvement. It's a public-private partnership that sets the stage and incubates these systems. If you look at shale drilling, it was created by George Mitchell in East Texas, and that's the story we always talk about in Texas. But they don't talk about all the money that the Department of Energy put into it through non-dilutive grant funding to build up that technology base. And it was amazing. It stimulated the economy, it stimulated workforce, it made us the #1 producer and exporter of LNG and oil and gas in the world. Wind and solar. In the late 90s, under George Bush, we built out the CREZ line, which is basically just a very large transmission network, a superhighway for electrons to get them from West Texas to where we consume the power in major baseload centers in our metropolitan areas. It was a build it and they will come strategy, and it worked. The same way when you have a growing metropolitan area and a city, a county, a state, to incentivize their tax base, they're going to go ahead and build out a big freeway, and then land developers come in and will build a subdivision. In the same way, by building out this infrastructure, they incentivized wind developers to come in and build out these massive wind farms, and it worked. And the $6 billion that went into it has netted 10x for the state. You can see when we started the CREZ line in the early 2000s, wind quickly ramped up. And in 2013, they finished the CREZ line and the curtailment issue dropped. Now we're starting to run into curtailment issues again because we don't have enough transmission again, which there are a lot of really great providers that are working on that problem. Now, for the two things you need to know on investing and deregulating right now, unlike oil and gas, which can be permitted in months, geothermal will take years. And for a novel technology, even though it's existed for a while, to have years of project financing soaked up as you just try to get through the permitting is unacceptable. There's no way that we can get through this. And right now, who holds that? It's the Railroad Commission of Texas. And if you're not from Texas and you're not familiar with this group, it has nothing to do with railroad tracks, but what's underneath them. Oil, gas, all the extraction of the minerals and assets in our state, and geothermal policy falls underneath them. So we need to lobby the Railroad Commission to make these changes. Now on the investment side, what we're proposing is an amendment to the Natural Resource Code. This would allow the Railroad Commission to accept federal funds, which they are technically not allowed to accept at this time. By doing so, we can take that non-dilutive funding that came through DOE that stimulated the shale boom and be able to create an investment fund for geothermal. The problem with geothermal is we try to do this through this typical mechanism, like I mentioned, of how we conventionally go out for exploration and production activities. But it takes a lot longer, and so it doesn't fit the project profile. If we can set up a fund that does dollar-to-dollar matching after $10 million, which succeeds in making sure that this isn't fly-by-night, these are people actually going out and raising project capital, we can sustain and develop a really fast-growing momentum on these projects. And through deployment-led innovation, we can drive down the cost curve, just like we did with wind and solar. Kendra brought up earlier about the DoD role in this. Right now, the first pilot project for geothermal is being built on Ellington Field south of Houston by Sage Geothermal under a grant through the Air Force. And we need a renewable energy coordination office. One of the pushbacks the last time a bill was pushed to enact some of these things, well, we don't have the expertise and it's going to cost $1 million a year in staffing. We need an actual office that can be tied adjacent or underneath the Railroad Commission to actually handle the permitting, the investment structure, and due diligence that's associated with this. We have the expertise for oil and gas. We lack that appropriately for geothermal. So as we go through this, I want you to, if anybody here is in Texas, reach out to your legislator in the state. The Energy Resources Commission or Committee is the one that oversees this. With executive sponsorship of a new bill in the next legislative session, we can make this happen. And with your support, I think we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Again, questions for the mic. I want to know, this seems to me like a nonpartisan issue, something that we should see support from both sides of the aisle. Is that true? Is it simply a bureaucratic issue, or do you see political divide on this?
There's some push because the last time this was pushed through, it was Democrat-led. And so the chairman of the committee is Republican, so immediately there's that cutting against the grain. But honestly, it's more of a bureaucratic issue. We do things the way we do things, and now you want to change it. Everyone who's served in the military has experienced this at one point or another. So it's really just a matter of change management, more than it is political divide or resistance.
Question to the mic.
Hey, Kevin. Great job.
Thanks.
Question. So with all the solar and the wind and the oil and the gas, where does geothermal fit into Texas' energy mix? And can you tell us a little bit about what the available resource is and how that would compare to other parts of the country, and why Texas is a good place to start?
Sure. So in geothermal, you're looking for fairways. So a lot of the geothermal research that was done in most of the country, and especially Texas, was done after the oil crisis in the 70s, when they started to say, as well as solar, hey, maybe we shouldn't be tied to an energy source as our primary power gen that we don't control and is handled by, petrostates. Having served in Iraq, I can feel that pain. So there are these really good fairways in South Texas where we already have existing drilling infrastructure in place. And so what you basically have to do is you use the geothermal as a base load to offset the predictable intermittency of renewables, as well as 60% of the down power during the freeze when my baby had to sleep on me because you can only put so many blankets on a 1-year-old. 60% of that lost power was natural gas. Had nothing to do with renewables. So having this without having to worry about the pipelines coming in and the weatherization, the freezing, you actually have a more stable baseload generation power capacity. However, again, we don't have the financial instruments to properly monetize geothermal. What is a clean electron worth? Wind and solar have to compete competitively against any other power gen. But if you're doing 24/7 clean baseload, do we put a premium on that? Do we treat that differently? And right now, the answer is no.
Hi, Kevin. Yeah, excellent job. Maybe just kind of piggyback off that question. I'm not that familiar with geothermal power in general, but I can imagine that different geologies support it. Some parts of the country are better than others. Is Texas the best place to start? And maybe you can just go into a little bit of the science behind what are you looking for in the land, the physical land, as an ideal place for a geothermal plant.
Yeah, so the thing you also have to think about with geothermals, there's actually multiple use cases. We're just talking about power gen right here, but there's also district heating and just heating uses. And also because there's a temperature differential, you can use it for cooling as well. This goes back to our earlier conversation about heat pumps. It's just a heat exchange mechanism. So the largest and longest running geothermal operation is the geysers in California. So, this is where you think of like the natural geysers in state parks. So you have a really high level heat differential close to the surface. You're almost just picking up the power right off of it. In Texas, it's not the ideal or best heat resource, but it is a good heat resource. When you think about residential, that gets a little bit trickier based on land use. You got to be further out. It's hard to do it inside of tight urban pockets. But Texas has sufficient capacity to do it. There's a ton of momentum in the state. The leading geothermal trade group is based out of Austin. Neighbors Drilling has partnered with Sage Geosystems. Patterson UTI, which is another E&P company, is partnered with Criterion. So there's a lot of momentum already happening inside of Houston that leverages the existing base of industry knowledge and technology. We have an existing base that's been installed for decades and have been operating for a really long time. This isn't that hard. We kind of just have to take more of a business approach rather than an environmental approach to how we solve this. If we all make money, trust me, everyone's going to keep wanting to keep doing it.
Thank you, Kevin. So that concludes chip box. And I'm getting microphone here. Oh, there we go. Thanks. A lesson. And that is taking us to the end of the show here. Just as a reminder, applications for the next cohort of the Veterans Advanced Energy Fellowship are open until August 15th. I won't make them stand here, but there are a number of the fellows of the current cohort. So if you're interested to learn more, I know all of them would love to share their experience with you. So for our next session, I am very happy to introduce a special guest, Mary King. Mary is an Army veteran herself and the Executive Vice President of People and Culture for Invenergy. Mary, please join me.
Thank you. This is my first chance to attend one of these events. Incredibly impressive, so congratulations to our chairs, and thank you so much for bringing this together. I've been thinking a little bit about what I could say because I feel like you've been here a long time and I'm standing between you and a drink. So I wanted to just take a moment to ask you what you'll take away from this. What will be different because you were here? What spark did you receive? Who did you meet? What will be different? There's no doubt that we're in a crisis stage. There's no doubt that this is an incredibly exciting time to be in the renewables business. So what will be different? I think about the law of inertia. You know, an object in motion tends to stay in motion. In my case, an object at rest tends to stay at rest, unless impacted by an outside force. My hope for you today is that this has been that outside force, that this has been something that has made a connection for you, that has helped you think through this, because we are desperately going to need leaders in this space. I don't think we'll solve it without leaders. We need leaders who can talk sense, not numbers, not acronyms, although those are great. Sense. We need you to separate the noise from the signal and tell us what's real. We need to understand so that we can move to action. If the house is on fire, you don't want a 27-page PowerPoint and at the end have action items. You need clear direction. That's what we need from leaders. And I think the people in this room, you could be part of getting it done. You know, in my role as a people leader, I go to a lot of retirements. I go to military retirements. I go to retirements after people have been working for 30, 40 years. Often they say, there was a leader who saw me. There was a leader who inspired me. There was a moment when I stepped up. And that changed my life. And it changed my career. And it brought me to a place that I never thought I could be. You could be that leader for someone else. You could be the person that makes the connection that moves us forward. How amazing would that be? How amazing would it be if you were that person for someone else? If they said, my whole career, what mattered to me was that person who believed in me and who led me forward. I think we have that quality of leader here in the room. I think we have an immediate challenge that needs immediate action. So my hope for you today is that you don't just go on to the next conference or go back to work or go on to the next flight, but that you reflect for a minute and take something here with you so that this conference is that external force that gets you out of inertia and moves you to action. You've certainly heard from experts. You've certainly heard from amazing participants and speakers. Take that moment and decide what will be different tomorrow than today. And if there's anything that we can do to help you, you now have a lot of peers to reach out to. So thank you all for coming. And with that, I'll turn it over to Greg.
Okay, gang, that brings us to a close. I want to thank, first of all, you all. You've been a wonderful audience, and we appreciate you joining us for these 2 days. We appreciate you traveling from your far-flung originations, and we appreciate the attentiveness and the enthusiasm that you've brought to this event. We've all fed on it. I'd also like to thank our virtual audience who's been with us, we think, every step of the way. I'd like to thank our production staff over here who have done a fantastic job throughout. And the caterers who kept us nourished and kept our blood sugar up so we could get through a full day of content. Okay, so what have we talked about? We've talked about energy security. We've talked about climate security. And we've talked about national security and all sorts of interesting ways that they interconnect and overlap. But this is the Veterans Advanced Energy Project. So how is it that veterans, military spouses, service members are connected to these three spheres? Well, you have an opinion on this as well as I. I'll tell you why I think it is. Number one, you all intuitively get how each one of these spheres affects life here at home. The quality of your life, your ability to raise a happy, healthy, and successful family, your ability to run a successful business, your ability to live the great American life. Because you've been over there, because you've been deployed. You see how energy security, climate security, and national security affect our ability to get the goods that we eat, our livelihood here in America. The vast majority of Americans do not connect those dots. Now, we do a lousy job of educating them about it, but they don't connect those dots. You get intuitively. You've lived that dream. Second, you get, from the time you began your training, way back in basic, you get the fact that individually, you're only going to get so much done, but collectively, we can move mountains. We can accomplish great, momentous things together. And if nothing else, this conversation today must have convinced you, if you didn't already believe it, these are global problems. You understand how to not only work with your fellow Americans, you understand how to work with our allies, our friends around the world to solve these global problems. You get that intuitively as well. 3. If you didn't believe in some greater purpose, I don't think you ever would have signed the bottom line to join the service. I think that service members and their spouses, they buy into the program, wouldn't sign up for the service if they didn't believe in something larger. They want to be something bigger than themselves. And that's what we've heard today, is that this space that you have so wisely entered into here provides you venue to continue to serve. And that's the way you're wired. So what I would ask you to do is do what you've been doing for 5, 10, 20, 40 years. Be yourselves and continue to serve. Thank you.